Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. US President Donald Trump signs a series of executive orders revoking many of the Biden-era policies. At least 66 people are dead after a fire tears through a ski resort in northwest Turkey. A deal could be struck between the US and China regarding the sale of TikTok in exchange for softer tariffs. And Zelensky mixes with the world's rich and powerful at the Davos summit as he seeks further support for Ukraine. US President Donald Trump has signed multiple executive orders setting out plans for his next 4 years in office. These new directives, many of them overturning Joe Biden's own orders, carry the weight of the law. But some are already facing legal challenges, as Nick Harper reports from Washington.
So we're going to sign executive orders first.
The businessman means business. Within hours of retaking office, US President Donald Trump signed dozens of executive orders. Some in a sports arena, watched by 20,000 of his supporters. First up, declaring a national emergency at the US-Mexico border. That frees up funding to increase security to prevent what he says is an invasion of illegal immigrants that threatens US sovereignty.
Today I will also declare a national energy emergency. We will drill, baby, drill.
The president wants to ramp up domestic energy production with more oil and gas drilling. For TikTok, officially banned in the US, he signed a 75-day reprieve, while a deal is done over the ownership of the Chinese app.
I think February 1st.
Not signed on Monday, but expected, are tariffs, with a threatened 25% import duty on goods from Canada and Mexico, now scheduled to start in less than 2 weeks. But already there are legal challenges against some of his actions. His plan to end birthright citizenship, a constitutional right, faces a lawsuit, with migrants claiming the president has no authority to redefine American citizenship. Well, there are already 3 lawsuits against his newly created Department of Government Efficiency, headed up by Elon Musk. The suit accuses the department of violating transparency laws. Some of the orders could now be bogged down in the courts for months to come, putting the brakes on the president's plan of full speed ahead. Nick Harper, Al Arabiya News, Washington.
Let's get more on those executive orders, specifically the January the 6th pardons, with our correspondent in Washington, Caroline Malone. Caroline, the January the 6th riots took place in the very same venue as the president's inauguration yesterday. And today, Donald Trump has pardoned the group he calls the J6 hostages. Now, who does that include?
That's right. So President Trump has essentially given clemency or even full pardons to around 1,500 people that were involved in the Capitol riots of January 6, 2021. That was the day in which people were listening to the then President Trump, who had lost the election. They were listening and believed him when they said that there was a miscarriage of justice. They marched down to actual Congress and some of them stormed in. Trespassing, violence was carried out against, in particular, police officers. And they were trying to essentially go into the inner chambers where the election results were officially being marked. Now, those people are essentially being let out of jail because of these pardons. Most of them were at sort of lower level sentencing. They were involved with the actual trespassing. They were involved with the protests. They were involved with damaging property. A higher level tier of people involved and charged carrying out actual violence. And those are some of the people that were involved, for instance, in injuring police officers, some of whom were badly injured. About 140 were badly injured that day. About 5 people ended up dying as a result of the attack. One of them was a police officer. And then you have this sort of most serious tier of person that has been given clemency. And these are the people who were charged and found guilty of plotting the attack. So seditious conspiracy was one of the charges laid against the former Proud Boys leader, who is now, according to family members, being released on Tuesday because he hasn't had a pardon, but he has had clemency, meaning that he'll serve no more jail time. Also, the Oath Keepers leader, who was also charged with stockpiling weapons and also planning this attack on Congress.
The majority of rioters pleaded guilty in court. What will happen to the ongoing court cases currently being investigated by the Department of Justice?
So most of the cases actually have wrapped, but for those that are pending, as part of this executive order, President Trump is asking federal agencies to get the Department of Justice to stop federal agencies from continuing those investigations. So essentially what that means is there will be no new people who are investigated and charged over the January 6th Capitol attack. As well as these pardons, we can expect that no more court cases will be going through federal courts in order to charge anyone new related to these days' incidents. I mean, from President Donald Trump's perspective, you know, he has basically called it a grave national injustice that these people were even put in prison in the first place. Clearly very differing views from other people, especially those lawmakers that were involved and inside the chambers at the time of the attack. Among those, people like Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer, who said that Donald Trump is ushering in a golden age for people that break the law and attempt to overthrow the government. So really, you know, a damning statement there from the people who really see this as clearly a bad decision to let all these 1,500 people out of jail.
You just touched on how the lawmakers are responding to this, but the January the 6th riots became one of the biggest criminal investigations in US history after Donald Trump's 2020 election defeat. You did mention around 140 police officers were injured and 5 died as a result. How are the police responding to this news?
So a number of former Capitol Police officers have come out with statements, and some of them spoke even before President Trump was back in office, as he is now today on Tuesday, because there was this suggestion from President-elect Trump that he would carry out these pardons. And in particular, I'll read to you a statement from former officer Harry Dunn, who has called this another dark day in American history and a continuation of the stain that January 6th has left on our nation. We've also heard from Alekino Gonel, who is another former Capitol Police officer, who's spoken to media and called this a betrayal. You know, from his perspective, President Trump is someone that's spoken out to support the police, who seems to be someone that gives backing to federal law enforcement agencies and supports anyone that are in a security position. But what you're seeing now is that clearly President Trump is acting in another way, instead helping to forgive the people that carried out the violence, even though that violence was carried out in some instances against Capitol Police officers.
Caroline Malone in Washington, thank you so much for joining me. As well as the January the 6th pardons, President Trump has announced he will be taking America out of the Paris Climate Agreement again and withdrawing from the World Health Organization. Trump has always been against the climate treaty, which he withdrew from during his first presidency, and has been heavily critical of the health agency run by the United Nations. Let's speak to Sara Firth, a foreign correspondent based in Washington for us right now. Sara, thank you for joining me. This isn't entirely a surprise announcement from Trump. He's been very open when it comes to his opinions on both of these things. But how exactly will it work, and when will we see the exit take place?
You're absolutely right. There were no surprises there, but a lot of disappointment, a lot of concern amongst some Americans at what we've already seen President Trump do in his first hours after he was sworn in as the 47th President of the United States of America, signing those executive orders, as you said, taking America out of the Paris Climate Agreement and the World Health Organization. But look, how is this actually going to work in practice? He's signed the executive orders. He's signaled his feelings, which he says is that here, America is being ripped off in these deals. But there is a process here that will need to be followed. It's going to need approval from Congress when it comes to exiting the World Health Organization. There'll be a huge amount, of course, of bureaucracy around how you even implement something like that. There are so many deals that are involved. There are so many partnerships that are involved when it comes to the healthcare system. When it comes to the Paris Climate Agreement, well, as well as making America great again, as he's promised, he's taking them out of the climate agreement again. Now, the last time you have that 1-year withdrawal process, and so it didn't complete in time. You had the Biden administration coming in and reversing all of that. So once again, we've seen President Trump recommitting to this, and this time it seems he's very adamant this is going to go ahead and this is going to happen.
As you mentioned, this is the second time Trump has pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement. It was later reversed by Joe Biden, as you just mentioned. But America is one of the world's biggest polluters. And also, Sara, we recently saw those devastating effects of the wildfires in Los Angeles. How has this decision actually gone down stateside?
Well, look, I mean, it's coming at a time, as you said, of these devastating LA wildfires, and also when you've had one of the hottest years on record. So this is seen by people in America who are concerned about the climate, concerned about what's happening, particularly in LA. As a very aggressive rolling back of America's climate policy. I've been reporting and speaking to people in the LA area affected by those LA fires. You know, people have been saying for years they were hoping that more would be done in California, but there's just huge concern, not just at the rebuild that's going to happen, but that now, as well as that, you've got, as I said, what's seen as this rolling back of help in this area. Donald Trump has been very clear, though, that he views this deal as a bad deal. He's been here before. We know what his feelings about it is. The big question, though, amongst many in America, particularly those impacted by the state of the climate, is going to be what fills the gap and what the new policies of the administration will be.
So let's go to the World Health Organization. America contributes around $1.2 billion to the WHO, the biggest sponsor of the organization. Surely this is a devastating blow to them. Have we heard from them? What's their response been?
You have, yes, as one of the biggest donors, the biggest donor to the World Health Organization. It's a massive blow for them. They've responded saying they're disappointed. They've expressed their disappointment, and they're hoping that the United States and President Trump will reconsider. What they're calling for is dialogue. Now, are we going to get it? As I mentioned, you've got a lot of partnerships that are taking place when it comes to American healthcare, when it comes to things like vaccines. It is a major undertaking to even think about America withdrawing from the World Health Organization and what that will actually look like in practice. But, you know, President Trump, he's already started this process. As we said, there's bureaucracy. It needs approval from Congress. He's there in the White House. We've seen him signing those orders, taking his place back where he's been before. But there is a long road ahead when it comes to whether in practice, this is going to be something that could be enacted. It will certainly be a long road ahead. But look, it really signals the fact that President Trump being back in power now, it's not just impacting what happens here in America and Americans and American healthcare. Such a blow to the World Health Organization. And this is a return to power, Trump's return to the White House, that is being felt around the world already.
Yes, indeed. Sara Firth, thank you so much. A foreign correspondent over in Washington. Thank you. Now, staying with President Trump, who said that tariffs on China could hinge on a deal over TikTok's ownership as he signed an executive order to keep the popular short-form video platform online in the US for 75 days. The order instructs the Attorney General not to take any action to enforce the law so that his administration has an opportunity to determine the appropriate course forward. Laura Westbrook has more on this.
As Donald Trump signs the executive order postponing a deadline requiring TikTok's parent company ByteDance, which is from China, to sell its stake or face a ban in the US, he told reporters that the US should be entitled to get half of TikTok if a deal for the app is reached. He also said he could certainly put tariffs on China if it rejected a deal, which he said would be a hostile act. And those tariffs could be as high as 100%. Now, the legality of Trump's executive order remains unclear, with the law having been signed by President Biden and upheld by the Supreme Court. We have heard some reaction from Beijing, with China's foreign ministry saying on Tuesday that companies should decide about their operations and deals when asked about Trump's vision for the future of TikTok. It also said that the US should earnestly listen to the voice of reason. On the social media site Weibo, users reacted to Trump's comments, some with disdain. One user saying that American companies like Apple and Tesla should also give up 50% of their shares to Chinese companies. Now, Trump campaigned on a promise to implement 60% tariffs on all goods imported from China. He also vowed to impose an additional 10% tariff on Chinese goods unless Beijing does more to stop the flow of the drug fentanyl. And despite that tough talk on the campaign trail, on day one, Trump did not immediately enact those sweeping tariffs. The move to hold off on tariffs against China does appear to offer a bargaining chip for a TikTok deal. Both the US and China have signaled interest in dialogue. On Friday, Trump spoke to Chinese President Xi Jinping, where he said he raised the TikTok issue. He's also said he could travel to China as soon as this year. President Xi Jinping also took the rare step in sending a senior Beijing official, Vice President Han Zheng, to the inauguration. TikTok was temporarily unavailable to some of its 170 million American users on Saturday, following the initial deadline under the divest or ban law, but resumed hours later. We've also seen this charm offensive from TikTok CEO Xiaozi Chu, who attended the inauguration alongside other tech billionaires such as Mark Zuckerberg. Now, TikTok is owned by ByteDance, which is from China, and there are concerns in the US that TikTok's ownership makes it subservient to Beijing. TikTok executives have denied sharing any data with Beijing.
Laura Westbrook in Hong Kong, thank you. Now, 66 people are dead and 51 injured after a fire ripped through a hotel in Turkey's Bolu Mountains earlier today. The blaze broke out overnight at the Grand Kartal Hotel in the popular ski resort of Kartal Kaya at around 3:30 a.m. 4 people have been arrested. We can now speak to a Turkish journalist, Umat Sevdi Tangor. Umat, thank you so much for joining me. Firstly, a devastating incident. Do we know how this fire started?
Thank you very much, Leigh Ann. It's really devastating time for Turkey. And also, I would like to say that it's just a couple of minutes ago, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan announced that one day mourning for Turkey public for tomorrow. According to Interior Minister of Turkey, a fire broke out at a hotel which at the peak of the Karaoğlu Mountains around 3:30 a.m. And the fire started at the restaurant section condition, according to initial report, which is on the 4th floor, and there's no certain reason right now explained to the public. And the hotel itself already 12-story building, and half concrete and half wooden. What it means actually, that is wooden coating on the concrete with 140 guest rooms hotel. Most of the people who are expert on this fires, they are saying one of the reasons that fire goes quickly and cover all the building because of this wood coating on the concrete. Emergency service and the big numbers of firefighters and the medical teams were dispatched to the area immediately after the fire. But having said that, please bear in mind that the mountain is 3:30 a.m. is full of snow, and the road is very icy. So it was not easy for all those rescue teams to arrive as quickly as possible. Therefore, it was not a quick dispatch for the people.
Difficult rescue operation underway, as you say. You mentioned how many people were staying at the hotel. Is this a particularly busy time of year with the ski season?
Yes, exactly, Lee, because it's a holiday right now for the whole schools. Also universities. The hotel therefore was full of guests because of the midterm holiday, and 234 guests, as we know, and according to the list there are same surnames. What it means actually, children, fathers and mothers were staying together, and as you said on your report, is 66 people lost their life and 51 were injured, and they are in very intense. They are in the still intensive care, and they are still in the serious condition, and 17 people have been discharged from the hospitals.
You mentioned there that there will be a day of mourning tomorrow, but what are authorities saying about what's happened?
Well, Justice Minister Yilmaz Tunç announced that 4 people, including the business owner, the owner of the hotel, were detained. And as I mentioned, there are some allegations that hotel doesn't have fire escape stairs. The Turkey Minister of Culture and Tourism, he stated that the hotel was inspected in 2001 and until the 2024, and that has fire qualification license. Tourism Minister also stated that regular checks should be carried out, and also they did until 2024, and until now no negative situation has been observed. However, I would like to add on this, the Chamber of Engineers and Architects of Turkey, who are non-governmental expert organization, they made a written statement, and they said they should be in the capacity in the hotel, automatic sprinkle system, so automatic watering system. Unfortunately, the initial reports say, and the photos and the videos of the hotels on the website is showing that the automatic sprinkle system that was supposed to be installed in 2008, according to the law, not installed. So because of this system not installed, the fire spread quickly and the casualties were more.
Turkish journalist Umat Sevdi Tangor in Istanbul. Thank you so much for joining me this evening.
Thank you, Lee.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making headlines today. Israel's military chief of staff, Lieutenant Herzi Halev, has said he will resign in March over the failure to prevent the October the 7th attack by Hamas. His resignation marks the highest profile departure of an Israeli official linked to the security establishment's failures, which led to the deaths of around 1,200 people. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has declined to take responsibility for those mistakes, stating that that accountability will come, but only after the war. US President Donald Trump has revoked sanctions on far-right Israeli settlers imposed by the Biden administration. The groups and individuals are accused of violence against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. Trump does not align with the long-held US position that settlements are illegal. The Taliban has released 2 American prisoners in exchange for an Afghan fighter. The deal was brokered by Qatar and announced during Donald Trump's inauguration ceremony. 2 other American citizens do remain in detention in Afghanistan. Britain faces a new type of terrorism, according to Prime Minister Keir Starmer. The UK leader was speaking in a reference to the Southport attack last July, where 3 young girls were killed. A British teenager has pleaded guilty to the murders that led to days of riots across the nation. The Prime Minister said the law may need to recognise new and dangerous threats. And Prince Harry and the publisher of The Sun newspaper are very close in negotiations over a potential settlement. The Duke of Sussex claims he was unlawfully targeted by journalists and private investigators who were working for the parent company News Group newspapers. A trial had been due to start at London's High Court today, but it has been delayed. Now, Volodymyr Zelensky has addressed world leaders and financiers at the World Economic Forum summit in Davos today. During his speech, the Ukrainian president compared Russia to North Korea and called on supporters to continue aiding his country against Putin. Zelensky will be hoping that Trump lives up to his pledge as peacemaker, ending the war in Ukraine following the Gaza ceasefire.
Thank you very much.
Let's go live to Kyiv now to speak to our correspondent, Ross Cullen. Ross, evening to you. Tell us what else Zelensky had to say at the Davos summit today.
Well, good evening, Leigh Ann. Volodymyr Zelensky spoke at length about Europe, saying there must be more investment in the defence sector in Europe because Russia is investing in its military-industrial complex, so Europe needs to ramp up production here. Europe also needs to be strong, he said, not relegated to a second or third-rate player in the international influence battle. Europe needs to speak up for itself and defend itself. Also something that was interesting in terms of the Middle East, Volodymyr Zelensky said that, quote, Vladimir Putin's strategy is to drag other countries into the war. He's dragged in North Korea, as you mentioned in the introduction. Volodymyr Zelensky saying that Ukraine's estimate is that some 4,000 North Korean soldiers have died so far. They've mostly been deployed by Russia, inside Russia, in the Kursk region, of which Ukraine has seized territory. But Volodymyr Zelensky also spoke about Iran being dragged into the war, particularly with the supply by Iran of Shahad drones to Russia, which are deployed by Moscow. And in fact, about an hour ago, there was an air raid siren here in Kyiv. We got the all clear just before we came on air, but it just shows that there are daily air attacks and the threat of air attacks all across Ukrainian territory. He said that Iran's influence is in fact reducing with the fall of Bashar al-Assad, but Ukraine is trying to increase its influence in the Middle East. It is sending food donations to Syria and has also recently sent a ministerial delegation to Damascus.
During his first speech as president, Donald Trump implored Putin to make a deal with Ukraine, saying he was destroying Russia. How has this message actually gone down where you are in Kyiv?
Well, Volodymyr Zelensky did say that he has very good relations with Donald Trump, but he says we need to wait a little bit longer to understand more of his plans in detail. But in terms of here inside Ukraine, one of the leading MPs, Yehor Chernev, spoke today saying that all leaders, when they win elections, get grace periods, get honeymoon periods, perhaps 100 days or so, when there is goodwill towards that leader. Donald Trump is no different, but there will come a time, according to this Ukrainian MP, when results will have to start to be delivered. that he's made a lot of promises, particularly in his inauguration speech, and the American people and Donald Trump himself will want to start to see results. So there should be some progress, he was hoping, on possible peace negotiations in the coming months. Leigh Gerrans also did say that 2025 is going to be a crucial year for Russia because of the dismal state of its economy and the threat perhaps that the United States maintains or even expands its economic sanctions on Russia, perhaps as a tactic to try to apply pressure to Vladimir Putin.
Ross, it's Trump's second day in office. He previously said he would end the war in the first 24 hours. But you did mention earlier that there have been missiles traded back and forth throughout today. Do you think we'll see Trump or his peace envoy making a visit to Kyiv anytime soon?
Yeah, that 24-hour timeline has certainly been pushed, Leigh Ann. They're now talking about months, the Trump administration, now that that is up and running. Keith Kellogg is the United States special envoy to Russia and Ukraine, and he actually had hinted that he would try to make a trip here to Ukraine before the inauguration. Now, that didn't happen, but we are watching for if that visit will be confirmed by him or by the new US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. Now, something else to watch for is that Donald Trump has said that despite the fact that he believes that Vladimir Putin is destroying Russia for failing to reach a peace deal, Donald Trump does still want to have a phone call with Vladimir Putin before Mr. Trump announces any possible measures to try to bring the conflict to a close. And, Leigh Ann, we believe that that phone call, if it does go ahead, will be another way that both sides in Washington and Moscow can try to lay the groundwork for a possible in-person meeting between the two presidents. So we are watching for that phone call and the possible outcome of that, and also for the first visit to Ukraine by Keith Kellogg and or Marco Rubio.
Ross Cullen in Kyiv, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Earlier today, South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol attended a constitutional court hearing of his impeachment for the first time. Yoon was arrested last week over his attempt to impose martial law in the country in December. Rebecca Buntan reports.
South Korea's impeached President Yoon told the court that he would answer any questions that they had. On Tuesday in court, Yoon said that he did not order military commanders to drag lawmakers from Parliament as he attempted to impose martial law last month. This was a move that shocked South Korea and pushed the country into political turmoil over the past few weeks. Lawmakers voted to impeach Yoon and he was suspended from office. But this is a decision that would have to be upheld by the Constitutional Court to have him permanently removed from office. Yoon's lawyers said that he had tried to impose martial law because of abuses that had been committed by the opposition. Yoon has been in custody since his arrest last week over separate criminal charges of leading an insurrection. Yoon is the first sitting president in South Korea to be arrested. The Constitutional Court has up to 180 days to decide whether Yoon should be permanently removed from office or if he should be reinstated.
Rebecca Bundan in Tokyo, thank you so much. Let's take a look at the top business news. The dollar has rebounded sharply today after plunging hours earlier. That's as Donald Trump's first day back as US President brought mixed messaging on tariffs and highlighted investors' sensitivities to headlines about trade policy. US futures rose after bouncing around yesterday as traders digested Trump's statements on economic policy and trade taxes. Britain's Chancellor Rachel Reeves will urge company bosses at the World Economic Forum meeting in Davos to invest in the UK. Her office says she will emphasise the country's political and economic stability and pro-business government. Reeves, who will be accompanied by Business Minister Jonathan Reynolds, will also highlight recent efforts to slash regulation in meetings with various business leaders, including JP Morgan's Jamie Dimon. Turning to sports news now, and Novak Djokovic has beaten Carlos Alcaraz to reach the Australian Open semi-final. The Serb looked in serious trouble at the end of his first set as he moved gingerly around the court, but he fought back magnificently. Djokovic will face Germany's Alexander Zverev next. And Haas Automotion has appointed Laura Muller as the first female race engineer in Formula One. Muller will work with new signing Esteban Ocon as one of the two new race engineers at the US-based team. The new head of strategy at Haas will also be a woman, Karen Cridledge, who was recruited from Red Bull's Racing Bulls team and will start work at the beginning of March. A reminder of our top stories. US President Donald Trump signs a series of executive orders revoking many of the Biden-era policies. At least 66 people are dead after a fire tears through a ski resort in northwest Turkey. A deal could be struck between the US and China regarding the sale of TikTok in exchange for softer tariffs. And Zelensky mixes with the world's rich and powerful at the Davos summit as he seeks further support for Ukraine. And that's all from us on W News. Thank you for joining us. Hadley Gamble's special interview with the Saudi Arabian Minister of Economy and Planning is coming up next. And don't miss Tom Burges Watson with GNT. Good night.
News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Al Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for joining me. I want to kick off by giving you the chance to tell me about the World Economic Forum. What are the opportunities there for Saudi Arabia?
Absolutely. So the kingdom's always prioritizing engaging with the global community to foster more global dialogue. We realize that with time, with Vision 2030, we've become a more integrated member of the global economy. And as such, we have an opportunity to be a stronger force for good to shape a more prosperous future. So we'll continuously engage in Davos, in the World Economic Forum, in all multilateral venues and all opportunities to work with our partners, to share our transformation, what we're learning from it, to learn from other opportunities and experiences, but also to work together seriously on addressing some of the global challenges that we see today.
The power of economic diplomacy. In your mind, what are the opportunities for foreign direct investment? Because that's a pillar of Vision 2030.
So under Vision 2030, Saudi Arabia has become a global investment powerhouse. We are leveraging our diplomatic determination, our economic potential, our resources. A lot of countries are known for strengths. Some are known for strengths in natural resources, others in human resources. With time, the kingdom is becoming strong in both. But also the growing growth platform that Vision 2030 has built in the kingdom in order to fire up new engines of growth, new sectors, reinvigorate old sectors, and attract quality capital that wants to really grow, not just in terms of size, but also impact to the kingdom. No country on earth today is witnessing the vast opportunities that are being created in the kingdom. And they're not being created because we want to increase FDI. They're being created because we are on a serious mission to restructure our economy and unlock the human potential of people in Saudi Arabia.
Is Donald Trump good for the Saudi economy?
So we've always maintained a very strong relationship with the U.S. It's a long-standing partnership that lasted until today 8 decades. It's always been strong, no matter which administration is in office. We look forward to working with the second Trump administration, as we have worked with previous administrations, to address and counter some of the global challenges we're facing, including the tepid economic growth that we're witnessing as a global community today.
How concerned are you by the Trump administration's rhetoric when it comes to China?
Saudi Arabia, as I mentioned, the important thing to focus on is that we've always played a meaningful, constructive role with all our partners. We are steadfast in investing and fostering global dialogue. One of the things that makes Saudi Arabia unique as a long-term, reliable partner is how much we value constructive partnerships across the board. We have a very strong relationship with the U.S. and a very strong relationship with China, and many strong relationships with many countries. And this has become even more clear after the launch of Vision 2030, after we started looking inwards and understanding what we need as an economy and society and know what we can offer to our partners, which has led to strong collaboration and growing strength in our partnerships, which we will continue to build on. That's one of the things the kingdom is known for and will continue to be known for.
So you're not worried about a Trump presidency and the impact it'll have on the Saudi economy?
We will continue to work with our partners, with our partners in the U.S. and other countries, to make sure that our transformation is yielding the results we are aspiring to achieve, but also is offering the opportunities that could be attractive for a lot of countries and a lot of private enterprises and entrepreneurs and innovators and even academic institutions and think tanks from around the world. And we think that back and forth will always be front and center and will showcase the value of this partnership.
How concerned are you about oil price today and that trajectory? Because obviously that still has a great deal to do with your ability to reach those 2030 goals.
So if we take a step back, the important thing we're focusing on is unlocking the full potential of our economy and society. And we believe, to simplify, there's two ways to achieve that together. One is finally detaching our economic activity from having to rely on the price of a single commodity. In parallel, unlocking the full potential of people in the kingdom to have a human-centric growth story. With time, that shift, that economic structure, will rely on all the resources that we have. And we talked about natural resources and the inflow that comes with it, but also more today than ever before, human resources and the potential that they're offering in the kingdom. So our approach to oil markets is about long-term stability. That's been our message, long-term market stability. We need to make sure that there is enough quality and clear supply and clarity of that supply that's meeting the growing demand, growing for many reasons. Even if you only look at the impact of generative AI and the impact of that on the global demand trajectory for energy. And that's what we will solve for as part of a larger group, OPEC+. As far as our reliance on oil, we'll continue working with our transformation towards relying less. Today, non-oil revenues represent a larger portion of our total revenue profile, and that will continue without adding more burden to the private sector, but by growing our non-oil economy. And we've instituted other tools that make us rely less with time on oil revenues, including we have institutions today, such as Sovereign Wealth Fund, the National Development Fund, that are supporting the private sector, crowding in private investment, growing new sectors, and so much more, that have their own budgets and their own long-term strategies, and that are delivering on them. More importantly, we want to make the shift to create more dynamism in the private sector so the private sector can truly lead the economic growth story in the kingdom. That takes time. We used to rely heavily on oil flows. Today we'll rely much less. In the future, we want to detach our economic growth activity and trajectory from having to rely on oil revenue completely, while still maintaining a global leadership role in the world of not just clean hydrocarbon energy, which is something we've demonstrated, but also more so renewable energy, transition solutions, climate tech, and so on.
You do rely on them a lot less, but you still rely on them. How worrying is U.S. energy dominance?
So as far as our role in the energy markets, our focus is on making sure there's enough energy supply, because we realize that energy security is imperative for global growth and global prosperity. So we'll continue playing that role. We'll continue assessing whatever could impact the markets of oil and what we need to do as a country, but also as a member of OPEC Plus, to address whatever needs to be addressed to make sure that there's long-term supply.
Tell me this, when you take a step back and look at what's been achieved in the last several years towards the goals of Vision 2030, where is Saudi Arabia still falling short? Is it in terms of employing women?
If you look at Vision 2030 closely, you'll see that we're on track and we're gaining momentum. This is the 8th year, and the momentum is as strong, if not stronger, as when this was launched. And there is progress areas on all fronts. In the first wave of impact, the drive was coming mainly from political will and the right, bold decisions. That was complemented with investments, new regulations, new strategies to unlock the potential of old sectors, but also to start new sectors. And we're seeing the impact of that today, but we're just in the beginning. I'll take tourism just as an example. The decision to start the tourism sector, obviously we started the tourism sector and the tourism sector, the sectors associated to tourism, culture, sports, entertainment, for many reasons. One, we believe this is an economic birthright of the Saudi economy and society. Imagine any Western economy, as an example, without these sectors. It's very hard to imagine. Two, they serve as a soft infrastructure that can make the kingdom more relatable, more accessible, more open, that can help us attract not just more capital, more operations, but attract minds, entrepreneurs, innovators, thinkers, to come and base in Saudi Arabia and grow, whether they want to grow their investments, their knowledge, their households, their families, whatever it is. We want them to view the kingdom as a place of growth. But that decision was taken a few years ago. In 2019, we managed to increase the level of inbound travel to the point where it went above our level of outbound travel for the first time in history. That was just before COVID. Right after COVID, I believe last year, inbound, or this year actually, inbound travel compared to outbound travel also is at a higher level by even a larger margin. Both increased. People are spending more, but people coming into the kingdom, our exported services in tourism have increased dramatically. Spend in tourism increased 40% over our numbers in 2022. Our GDP numbers in Q2 and Q3 wouldn't have been this strong if it weren't for that decision to start these new sectors. That's one example. Another example, more on the human capital side. We're seeing more entrepreneurs, even Saudi entrepreneurs, coming back to the kingdom, rebasing in the kingdom, in the region or from outside of the region, who want to start opportunities here. Saudi students who used to jump at the opportunity to learn abroad, which we believe is a great thing, to learn wherever you can get the best knowledge and education.
But bring it home.
And bring it home, or continue being leaders in other economies. That's fine. I think it's a personal choice. But remain connected, I think, to the country, of course. But with time, we're seeing people hesitant to leave the country. They want to study where they can apply their knowledge, on-the-job training, in the opportunities that are being created in the kingdom.
They want to be a part of the future.
And part of the action that's happening on the ground today. And that's just another example. And there are many examples to demonstrate the progress. Is the job done? Not yet. The mission is not accomplished. We are looking at our success and our progress with pride. We're not over-celebrating. We know the job is still in the middle of the journey, and there's a lot more serious work to be done.
Talk to me about the investments in artificial intelligence. How will AI fundamentally change Saudi's economy?
So the kingdom is focusing on addressing and steering disruptive innovations. We believe in investing in digital capabilities. In the past, we've invested in digital infrastructure that led to the growth today especially in the startup scene of fintech and e-commerce. Some of the largest startups in the region in fintech are Saudi-based, and the growth numbers are huge. Venture capital in 2023, MENA-wide, was led by the Kingdom, and it was mainly driven by these two areas. The first international venture capital deals were drawn into, and the big brand names were drawn into e-commerce and fintech. I'm very proud of that, and we believe there more innovation will come from that. So that will continue. We believe in innovation and its impact on unlocking economic potential locally and globally. As far as artificial intelligence, we believe the Kingdom will be a leader in this field in the future. We're trying to focus on three themes. One is investing for strategic and financial returns, so making the right investments, and that has begun already. Two, being a larger part of the global value chain in generative AI, and the Kingdom has a lot to offer in that area, whether it's
What does
land.
that look like?
So there's a lot to offer in terms of the land that's available.
For data centers?
The energy for data centers, and additional services around it as well. The access to renewable energy. Sometimes it's hard to export green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, but it's probably easier to bring the energy closer or bring the facilities closer to where the energy is. So we can export compute rather than exporting energy specifically. And the regulatory environment. The Kingdom has a competitive, agile regulatory environment that can compete with most environments. But more importantly, the third theme is for the Kingdom's public sector and the private sector to be super or power users of the value that comes from generative AI. Generative AI is best utilized in terms of value the closer it is to use cases. And the Kingdom has many sectors where we've accumulated so much knowledge and data over decades that can, matched with AI, can be a source for our global either performance or global export potential. I'll name three of them, or two of them. One is energy. We've accumulated a lot of knowledge in energy. We've become leaders in clean hydrocarbon energy, and we will continue to invest in it so that we are leaders in not just renewable energy, green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, carbon capture, utilization, sequestration, but other technologies and solutions needed for a just and orderly and a pragmatic energy transition. Number two is healthcare. We've invested so much in healthcare. We've spent so much in healthcare over decades. We've accumulated so much knowledge. Most of our trainees are relied upon in international healthcare systems. The people who train in the Kingdom and then go to other countries are some of the best in their fields. Some of the first surgeries that were done using robotics have been done by Saudi teams in Saudi Arabia. And we're only getting started if we focus more. One of our private sector healthcare providers has recently signed with an international Ministry of Health to export their hospital information systems, Habib Healthcare. And that's a prime example of how a technology programmed by Saudis in the 90s today became a superior tool in the world of healthcare. Match that with the power of AI and the use cases that can come from healthcare and the need for treatment and screening and longevity and life extension. The potential is immense.
Talk to me a bit about the minerals sector beyond oil. When we talk about how Saudi Arabia could potentially become a conduit between East and West in the search for rare earth minerals, His Royal Highness Prince Abdulaziz, the Minister of Energy, recently announcing that Saudi Arabia would enrich uranium for export. That will raise a lot of eyebrows. How does that factor in to the health of the Saudi economy?
So if we go back to what we said with regards to unlocking the potential of the Kingdom's economy, we talked about planning, the importance of planning with confidence, delivering with optimism, and we believe optimism is a strategic choice. Optimism is not just a gut reaction or an emotion. It is a choice. By design, you want to be optimistic. More importantly, managing with prudence. You'll see that our focus is on firing up new sectors, new engines of growth, reinvigorating other ones. The Kingdom has been sitting on a lot of mineral reserves. Today, what's being witnessed today, especially these few days in the Future of Minerals Forum, in terms of advancements in the mining sector, are happening at a pace faster in the last few years than they did in the decades before that. The kingdom wants to be a leader in not just innovation, but also in being an integral part of the global value chain, not just investing locally, but investing globally, and being a leader in the thought process and the progress of the thinking around the mining sector and where it's going, for many reasons. We want to avail material here that can make our industrial complex more attractive and attract more industry to be based in the kingdom. But also we want to make sure that we have access to the critical materials for our current industries and to remain competitive. And that's part of our ambition to become, which we're very much focused on, a global industrial and logistics platform. At the heart of everything, we want to be able to diversify our source of growth by allowing and pushing the private sector to be able to export more products that are more complex, that have a higher value add in the kingdom, competitively into external markets. And mining plays a big role in that approach.
And you're not worried about the geopolitical implications of that?
Well, if we're going to continue to foster global dialogue, and we'll continue relying on dialogue and common ground and collaboration, we believe that any challenges that we might face can be addressed in that regard. Ultimately, we want to be a constructive force of good for the advancement and unlocking of the potential of many sectors, including this one.
Tell me this. Saudi Arabia, obviously the biggest economy in the region. When you speak to, as I do, leaders from surrounding nations, they say, when Saudi Arabia is doing good, we are all doing good. How does the health of the Saudi economy, in your mind, play into regional stability?
So our drive to shape a more prosperous future comes from this. The kingdom has always played a leadership role globally and a leadership role in the region. It's always been a force for more stability and more peace and more security in the region and globally. Today we're more integrated, and we realize that any success we may have will have a serious and direct impact on the region, but also on the globe, and vice versa. Any changes that happen to the global economy or the regional environment could have an impact on our plans and ambitions. So we're dealing with this on two tracks. One, where we directly engage with global partners to make sure that, as far as the region goes, we lay a clear and irreversible path towards more security, more peace, and ultimately more prosperity, but also across from the region, or let's say outside of the region, play a meaningful role in addressing global challenges, economic, geopolitical alike. We've seen that when the kingdom led the G20, during the G20 presidency. We've seen that today as the kingdom, through the Minister of Finance, heads the IMFC, all focusing the Committee for Status on the Committee on the Status of Women, and many other venues where the kingdom is being relied on to address and lead in addressing some of the global challenges. Indirectly, but closer to home, the success of Vision 2030, the success of this long-term transformation, is important for unlocking the potential of the kingdom as an economy and a society, but also because a stronger Saudi will lead to a stronger Middle East, and we believe a stable Middle East is imperative for global growth and global prosperity.
And finally, Your Excellency, when you think about this with regards to the broader themes of the World Economic Forum, a lot of conversation surrounding China, a lot of conversation surrounding interest rates, the amount of capital at large today, and how investors can find returns. What does all of that mean for Saudi Arabia, in that you've got a lot more to do before 2030, you are on track, as you say. What headwinds do you anticipate?
If you take a step back, we like to look at the world, or like to look at things in two lenses. One is more data-driven, evidence-driven, telling us where we are today and why. And the other is about future prospects, future potential, and what we need to do today to unlock the potential of the youth and future generations. Under the first lens, if you look closer, you'll see that the world is going in two directions. One that is settled into this economic stalemate. We have growth between 2.7 and 3.2 expected, projected, but it's tepid growth. as some of the experts call it. And two, and sometimes the same people who are commenting on this type of growth, including us, we're talking about the potential of technological disruption, the potential for bold leadership to change the world, to address creating new opportunities for growth, AI's impact, etc. But it's continuously two modes. If we kind of focus on the second lens and say, what do we need to do today, we'll realize that we need to really embrace innovation. We need to embrace addressing the challenges of the global south. We need to address having more opportunities for intrepid leadership to get us out of the tepid growth profile we are having today. We need to create new sectors, reinvigorate old ones. And that will get us out of where we are. And if you look closely at Vision 2030 and the Saudi story, you'll see it as an evidence point of a country with intrepid leadership that has decided at that time, even remember how things were not as, I'd say, positive as an environment as they are today. There was a lot of headwinds there, even more in some cases, that decided to be optimistic, decided to put in the work to live up to that optimism and unlock its potential of its economy and society, and play an even more constructive, more active role in the global community to address some of its challenges. I think that's important. We will continue to be steadfast in playing the role that we always want to play, which is a role of a long-term reliable partner that is adamant to shape a more prosperous future.
And so 2025 will be a good year for Saudi Arabia in terms of the numbers?
Our projections for 2025 is that obviously this momentum is still continuing. Our non-oil growth in 2024 was 3.9%. Our non-oil growth for 2025, we project it to be 4.8%, and 2026, 6.2%. What's important is not just what we achieve in 2025, it's also what we're laying the ground for in terms of achieving in the long term. This is a long-term marathon that we're very serious about, and we have the agility to run sprints here and there to make sure we capture the opportunities as they arise.
Your Excellency, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Adley.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deep fake and artificial intelligence,
They've got to have a vote and a say.
it's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on The Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Hello and welcome to this special interview on Al Arabiya News. I'm Joanne Saria. Today, we're shedding light on critical issues that affect millions of women across the Middle East and beyond. From war-torn areas to more stable nations, women's sexual and reproductive health remains a pressing challenge. We'll explore the impacts of conflict, poverty, and cultural taboos, and discuss the importance of comprehensive sexual education, particularly for youth in the Arab region. We'll also look at how health awareness and attitudes have evolved over the years and what steps are being taken to address the needs of women in low literacy communities. To further discuss these topics, I'm joined by Layla Baker, the Regional Director for Arab States in the UNFPA. Layla, thank you so much for joining us today. Let's start
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Let's start with the ongoing conflicts in the region. You've witnessed everything firsthand, all the challenges there. What are the most pressing health challenges women are facing in war-torn areas like Gaza and Sudan, and how are you addressing them?
Thank you very much for the question, because I find that all too often women's health and women in general are the first things that are dispensed when something goes wrong. In times of stability, UNFPA works very hard to build up resilient healthcare systems, the workforce that'll help bring reproductive and sexual health to women wherever they may be. And it works very well. So family planning, lots of comprehensive sexual education, a lot that we do on safe motherhood, birth, postnatal care. But the minute conflict strikes, something changes, both in the dynamics of the communities that we work in, and certainly the safety and security elements that are there. So if you ask me about what the most pressing issues are, of course, there's the life-saving element. Imagine that you're a woman who is one of many, almost 2 million who've been displaced in Gaza. No home, no water, no fuel, a very fragile shelter. And you're pregnant. Now, what should be one of the most precious, joyous moments of your life, albeit something that's filled with anxiety, a normal kind, is now fraught with uncertainty about your own life, that of your unborn child, and your entire family. So one of the most pressing issues that we have is the continuation of access to health care. And in the case of Sudan, Yemen, Palestine, the health systems have been so destroyed. The infrastructure has been so heavily attacked, and the healthcare workforce is also killed, both deliberately and as collateral damage to the war, that we no longer have access. Even if you could get to a facility, accessing that care becomes almost impossible. So for a woman in that position, the physician who has to treat her without medication, in cases of cesarean sections also with limited access to anesthetic, you can imagine what kinds of issues that she may face. And UNFPA works to provide emergency care in all of those situations. We bring in people, surgeons, midwives, doctors. We work with all the partners on the ground. We try and provide hygiene products for women who are and girls who are menstruating where there's no access to clean water. And we stay and we deliver even when the bombs are falling on our own heads, even when UN staff are being killed. We never leave anyone behind. And first and foremost, that means the women and girls in crisis.
And in terms of delivering this aid to the women and girls in these areas, we know Gaza, aid has been blocked from entering the Strip. How has your organization been getting around this?
Well, getting around it is really the term. Let's start where we really need to put the emphasis, though. Aid workers and the aid infrastructure and the civilian infrastructure of any territory and country, including in Gaza, needs to be protected. It's not just about getting humanitarian. We have turned what is fundamentally a political attack on the people of Gaza and the Palestinian population into a humanitarian crisis by allowing it to continually to be attacked so brutally. It is on the member states to put a halt to that. Once that is achieved and you have a permanent ceasefire that respects international humanitarian law and the lives of the population of the Palestinians residing in the Gaza Strip, then unhindered aid needs to flow, and the protection of the aid workers as well as those of the civilians that they deliver to. If I tell you in Gaza that we've had nearly 300 UN staff members who've already been killed, that's unacceptable. And it continues on where Israel finds impunity in those actions. That has to come to a halt. All parties to the conflict need to come to the table and resolve it. And where women and girls are concerned, they need to be given priority. So UNFPA makes for sure that in any aid that does get in, reproductive health care supplies are delivered. Our partners on the ground work hand in hand with the community there, and they themselves have been displaced. So prioritization of women, prioritization of the goods that they need, and making for sure that we can continue to advocate for that wherever they may be.
Okay. What are the long-term consequences or impact of these challenges, not only on women, but on families and even entire communities?
I think we haven't seen that. The conflicts are still ongoing and raging in Sudan, Yemen, Palestine, and many other places around the region. I can only tell you what we know from empirical evidence from other places, because until there's permanent peace and until you can get people back on their feet and look at not only the physical consequences of death, morbidity, but also the psychological impact, we don't know what it's going to be like after you've been under siege for 16 months. We don't know what it's like for the children who are going to grow up orphans and have seen their parents brutally killed. But you can imagine from what we have from evidence in other places, and unfortunately, humans don't learn from their prior mistakes, that there will be long-term consequences on the psychological impact and probably on the fertility as well of women and girls, even the intent to engage and give birth if it's been so traumatic. I can only speculate at this point, but none of that will be good. It will be on the international community, UNFPA, amongst the main partners in that, to ensure whatever we can do to help women and girls and their families and their communities access that care, to make it available once it's safe enough for us to deliver.
Okay. What about women's health in, say, more stable countries, but with still a very high poverty rate? For example, Jordan or Egypt. What are the challenges that you're seeing there?
That's an excellent question, and thank you so much for asking it. Because the one big challenge that we have globally, where women and girls are concerned from a gender perspective, is inequality. You're already at the losing end of the spectrum if you're born a girl in many of our countries. Taboos, social, cultural norms that don't allow for women to have free mobility. At 12, when you hit puberty, a boy's world opens up. He becomes much more active. He's seen as a young man. He's given privilege and access to the world. And a young woman's world starts to shrink and become much more domestic. So with UNFPA, we focus a lot on a few things. Other than the aspects that I mentioned to you about having healthcare that's part and parcel of the systems, not as a peripheral service that's provided, but really one of the fundamental aspects of healthcare delivery, making for sure that it's budgeted for in the national budgets and revenues also contributing to that. We start young. Sexual and reproductive health and information around your own body and your decision-making allows you also the critical thinking and information that you can make good life choices. When to get married, how to choose a partner, how many children to have. That allows you to exercise your own freedom, but also consider your community and your nation at large. And so we think these are the elements that we like to look at over the long term. In the short term, we also try and provide an injection of cash voucher assistance to some of the poorer women to allow them to access. We provide care that's free of charge, and we provide mobile services in many of those communities that you mentioned. But the focus really is on ensuring that everyone has access to free and informed choice. People do things for a reason. And so if you want to really tackle poverty, you have to hit it at the reasons why people are impoverished, because they've been marginalized, and the inequality that leads to that. That's what we do at UNFPA.
Leila, you mentioned education. Let's talk a little bit about comprehensive sexual education. This may be a bit of a taboo subject even in the West, so not just here in the Middle East. What does sexual health education entail, and why is it crucial for the youth in the Arab region?
Well, I think comprehensive sexual education is important for everyone. And I think we've made it taboo. Part of it is because it's so mysterious and it's considered such a private subject. but we are all products of reproduction and sexual relations. Understanding that process and being able to have the information that allows you to choose well when you have children, who you will engage with, and to be able to protect yourself from being exploited as well as some of the things that we really think are important. And it also links to some of the national priorities. I think all too often we think of it only through the lens of sexuality and the taboo of the norms. But think about population growth and distribution. If you understand that the choices that you make as an individual on who and how many children to have and when, then you'll understand also what your contribution as a citizen or a member of that society means. And hopefully you'll make choices that are good for you as well as for your community and your nation, rather than it being an imposition of a policy on how many children to have. You allow for people to access the information that allows them to make a responsible choice. That's what we focus on.
So how do you navigate cultural sensitivities to effectively deliver this knowledge in diverse communities?
You embrace it. You understand what are the norms first, because I don't think that there's a lot of projection, in my opinion. I don't think any society is homogenous, even in a single country. And so understanding the local communities, we do a lot with local communities, and not imposing a single format. Where you try and understand what are the things that the community wants, where they see sexual education or reproductive health education, or even the services that they provide as something meaningful to them, rather than an objective that we come in with. And we work with local partners on the ground. We work with the women and girls themselves. And we work with community leaders, religious leaders, to understand also if we need to tailor some of the messages, or we need how we would work with them. And so it allows for much greater two-way communication, where we also learn from the community about what we need to adjust. And it feels much more tailored to not only their needs, but also their aspirations for what they would like as individuals or a nation.
What about low literacy areas? What methods are being used to educate women in these low literacy areas in the region about sexual health and just women's health in general?
Yeah. It's funny that you ask that. I mean, UNFPA doesn't engage in literacy programs per se. That's not our area of expertise. But literacy as we know it, to be able to read and write, is certainly important. And we try and work with our partners to lower the literacy rate. Equally important is understanding what sort of intuitive knowledge and experiential knowledge that the women who have not had access to, schooling per se, formal schooling. There's an enormous amount of intuitive, intergenerational knowledge that's passed down. Some of it is quite correct. Much of it is tied to social norms and behaviors. And so working with the women in the community to understand what drives their desires, their aspirations, and linking it back to the programs that we have, either in reinforcing some of the positive norms, but also correcting some of the misinformation. And then using even the women who are illiterate to speak to other women and encourage people to become literate. Because it has to be a two-way conversation. And I think one of the things that I love most about UNFPA is the fact that we don't see ourselves as the giver and there's someone else who's the receiving at the end. It's a conversation where it's constantly evolving in the direction of what can we learn from the community and how can women and girls be agents of their own change, and where we just facilitate that conversation.
And over time, say the past couple of decades, how have attitudes towards sexual and reproductive health evolved in the Arab region?
Kind of a tricky question because, again, it's not homogenous. In 2024, UNFPA did a very large formal review with the governments on some key indicators around sexual and reproductive health, population, and development, because they're intrinsically linked. And we found overall that there was progress on a lot of the indicators. Maternal health, for example, is doing better now than we did 30 years ago or 40 years ago. The fertility rate is dropping as well. So people are having fewer children, they're investing more in their children. And overall, people live longer. But those are aggregate figures. And it's the inequality that hits at the hardest and at the heart of the matter. If nations are only looking at the aggregate data, then you tell the wrong story. And I think if I look overall, there's a lot of progress, particularly on the health side. There's a lot more awareness about how to protect from gender-based violence and a lot more receptiveness even to engage in it at the service level. But what we haven't been able to really hit at is how to reduce the gap between the haves and the have-nots. And I fear that if we don't keep a stronger eye on that, that we will start to see regression in the next decade around even some of the positive indicators.
Okay. And what are the UNFPA's key priorities for advancing women's sexual health and education in the coming years?
Our priorities always remain the same. If we had it our way, there would be zero gender-based violence in the world. No woman would ever have to be subjected to that. There would be zero preventable maternal death. So no woman should die giving life, bringing life into this world. And we want zero unmet need for family planning. So if you want to plan your family correctly, you need the right information, the right access to service, the right planning methods, and the ability to make your choice. So whether that's the health systems or the legislative procedures that support it or the community mechanisms, the taboos, we work across the board on that. So we want 3 zeros. No one to suffer at the hands of gender-based violence, no one to die bringing life into this world, and no one to not be able to have the choice on when and how many they would have in their family. We want to have people exercise that choice freely.
And in terms of delivering that information and education for individuals or families or women or even young girls, what methods are you using now as things have developed? There's technology, social media. What methods are being used?
It's not just about information, by the way, also, although I'm glad you raised that issue. Education and information is only one part of it. But think about the times that you've had information about something but not been able to access it for one reason or another. So we're very careful, one, about being seen as the provider of the most accurate information. So if you go to our website, we can guarantee that the information there is 100% true on where services are, on the information that you can get around menstruation, around hygiene, around safe delivery, around prevention of gender-based violence, including sexual violence. So we are the source of that true information. And through all of our media channels, our website, social media, we try and get the word out. The second is that we also try and have a conversation, if you will. So what's hindering people from being able to use that information properly? Is it the fact that there are social norms? Do we need to work with the community? How should we do that with our partners, with local people, religious leaders? Or is it that we have legislation that prevents it? And this has been a big one over time where governments come and go. Even the country where I'm a citizen and grew up in the United States has changed fundamentally over the years, depending on who's in power, and shifts and sways. So UNFPA tries to also work with the media, the mainstream media, not only and we really appreciate the time that you have. This is one of the ways that we're very happy to engage, is that if we are the source of that information, how can we use the media also to get the message out and then get feedback so that we can work at the individual level all the way up to the nation?
Leila,
very difficult.
Yeah, Leila, just one more question regarding gender-based violence. You did mention that, and I want to talk about that a little bit. How have things changed over the years? So there's the female genital mutilation, child marriage. How have things changed and evolved over the past few years?
There's so many forms of gender-based violence. And fundamentally, like what we were talking about, poverty, inequality is the big piece that we need to tackle. if women are always seen that they are less than everyone else in their society, if young girls are also seen even at a lower rung, they're to be seen but not heard, and that they do not have agency over their own choices that they make, to go to school, on the literacy piece that you talked about, on being able to pursue a career, on being able to have a work-life balance, who to marry, when to marry, how many children to have, then you can see where the layers of gender-based violence and some of the issues that you raised, particularly around child marriage, are problematic. But then again, we don't label them because people do what they do for reasons that may not be known to us. And if I, as a parent, no one wants to see their child harmed. No one wants to see anything but good. And every parent who does what they do, whether that's the female genital mutilation or early marriage, fundamentally, we believe has the best interest of their child. What we try to do is ask, how do you see that? If you had the choice to break the social norms that force you into choosing female genital mutilation, if those weren't there, would you still practice? And everyone says no. So then we say, how are we going to change the social norms around that? What do we need to do to work hand in hand with you? And similarly, child marriage. Now, child marriage and all of these are very complicated in times of poverty, in times of economic decline and crisis, because they are also intrinsically tied to livelihoods. So we work with our partners to ensure that people who are perpetuating these norms or perpetuating these behaviors, which we would like to reduce, that we try and find a way that they have an alternative mechanism for their livelihoods rather than having to rely on them. It's not very easy.
Layla Baker, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you also. I wish you well.
Thank you.
News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Al Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Mr. Richard, how do you see Trump's presidency playing a role in the innovation of the crypto industry over the coming 4 years?
First of all, thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here. Well, I think we are all positive with President Trump administration, right? So if you look at it, he has appointed the AI and crypto czar, meaning that these are the two key areas. And if you think about it, these are the two key technologies that will be driving every economic subsector going forward, from real estate to media, entertainment, to supply chain financing, and financial services in general. And these are the two most important technology to drive cost efficiency and effectiveness. So we're very excited with his administration. He promised to appoint pro-crypto regulators that will formulate clarity and give clarity to this space, but also things like US strategic Bitcoin reserves. And those are things that we're all looking forward to. And US has an outsized influence globally. So with that positive narrative, I do think that many countries around the world will start firstly looking at strategic Bitcoin reserve as well. And then secondly, giving much more clarity in terms of regulations to regulate this space.
What would be different to Binance under Trump presidency? Are you planning to gain your full license in all the states anytime soon?
At Binance, there's nothing that's going to be different, right? We're focusing on building. Last year, we started the year reaching an important milestone of 250 million users globally, and that's huge. So we are looking forward to continue to serve our global users to the best of our ability to do so. We will continue to monitor the US market. At this point in time, we have no plans, But going forward, depending on how things evolve, we may reconsider that issue further down the road.
Regulation is a main topic in the crypto industry. How does Binance approach working with the regulators in the different markets?
That's one of my 3 commitments when I stepped into the role of CEO in November of 2023, right? My second commitment is to really work very closely with global regulators on this front, because the direction of travel is very clear. There's going to be much clearer regulations, much more compliance, which is why we invest very heavily in the compliance space, and we work very closely with global regulators and law enforcement agencies. Binance is the most regulated crypto exchange globally. We have 21 regulatory approval globally, the latest one being in Brazil. And last year in 2024 alone, we secured 7 new regulatory approval, including in Argentina, Brazil, Thailand, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, Dubai, and that list goes on. And we look forward to work very closely with global regulators to formulate frameworks that on the one hand support the innovative part of crypto, and on the other hand manages the risk aspect of crypto.
In the MENA region, how do you assess the adoption of a crypto industry and what is missing? What are your views when it comes to Saudi and UAE?
If you look at it, Saudi is an extremely important market in the MENA region. But if you look at the development of crypto regulations, just that aspect alone, Bahrain and UAE are ahead of the curve. So that's only on the regulatory aspects, and we work very closely with regulators in Bahrain and UAE. We are regulated in both countries and jurisdiction across the different parts of UAE as well. We're looking forward to working very closely with regulators in Saudi, including SAMA, CMA on that front, as Saudi look to develop its own crypto regulatory framework to support this sector. As I mentioned, crypto together with AI are the 2 most important industry, and we look forward to really support everybody's journey on this. Crypto adoption in the MENA region is extremely high. In UAE alone, I believe is above 30% in terms of crypto adoption. Saudi has very, very high adoption as well. And we look forward to be in the Saudi market, working very closely with regulators to be regulated there, working very closely with the banks and payment service providers to really support our Saudi friends in terms of their crypto journey.
How do you view the rise of decentralized exchanges compared to centralized ones? Do you see a future where DEXs become more dominant?
My view is this, right? So we are at a very early stage of crypto adoption. So we are between 7 and 8%. If you look at what happened to internet, for instance, and every technology, once you reach a critical adoption pace of about 7 to 8%, the next 10% will come through very quickly. So that means that both centralized exchange and decentralized exchange will continue to grow because the pie is growing, and we are very excited with that future. Will there come a time where decentralized exchange overtakes centralized exchange? It may happen. But as of now, centralized exchange offer many features that decentralized exchange are not able to offer, right? For example, proper customer service, people that you can contact. Regulators can work with centralized exchange to regulate them, make sure there's proper KYB, KYC, customer onboarding, transaction monitoring. And those are things that they can't do with decentralized exchange, right? So with more activities moving there, I do think regulators will start to focus their attention on decentralized exchange part of it. Will it overtake? Over the very, very long term, it might happen when you have much more crypto native being in the industry. But as of now, I think centralized exchange will still play a critical part in most people's crypto journey.
What upcoming projects or technological advancements is Binance focusing on?
We are agnostic, and what we want to do, we are the largest crypto ecosystem. What we wish to do at this very early stage of crypto adoption is to really support the different areas of innovation, right? So be it in terms of things like stable coins, in terms of payment space, utility, the infrastructure layer, DeFi, GameFi, you have things like AI agent, etc., and the list goes on, right? And all these are innovation. The way for crypto to continue to develop and be sustainable are firstly much clearer regulations, much better user interface and product features, but also more importantly, having more innovation and more utility, more use cases. And that will continue to support the crypto narrative and adoption globally.
How important are the partnerships and collaborations to Binance's growth strategy? Can you share any exciting partnership that Binance is working on?
It's very important. So it's one of my 3 commitments. It's my 3rd commitment. The reason why partnership is important is, again, we are at a very early stage of crypto adoption. So we want to make sure that we support different forms of innovation. And we can't do it alone. We can only do it through partnerships. As more and more people come together and rethink the future of the world, be it in terms of financial services, in terms of payments, in terms of entertainment, in terms of DeFi, etc., the better we will be. So all these are achieved through partnership. We just announced an important partnership with USDC, with Circle, in terms of supporting stablecoin, which is an extremely important use case and utility within the crypto world. So globally, in different regions around the world, we have different forms of partnership, and we will continue to work very closely with our global as well as regional and local partners to support crypto adoption.
Is there anything you would like to say to Binance users or the broader crypto community watching this interview today?
We are very grateful. We have achieved a key milestone of 250 million users in 2025. Last year, we onboarded 70 million new users alone. So if you think about it, close to 30% of users are new users on the platform. We're extremely, extremely grateful for all your support, trust, and confidence, something that we hold very dear. And we continue to build the best-in-class platform with the best features out there to really support everybody in their crypto journey. We are still early, keep building, the future is bright.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
my campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on The Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's programme, President Donald Trump hasn't wasted a second since being sworn in as US President, signing an array of executive orders with a particular focus on immigration and energy issues. In a swift move, Donald Trump reverses efforts to prosecute the January 6th Capitol attackers, pardoning or commuting the sentences of more than 1,500 individuals. And in the Middle East, President Trump also makes some major announcements, lifting sanctions on Israeli settlers in the occupied West Bank. This on his first day back in office. Hello and welcome to the programme. About 24 hours have now passed since President Donald Trump took the oath of office, and since then he's kicked off his second presidency with an unprecedented show of executive force. He's done this by signing a whole raft of executive orders on issues ranging from immigration to pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement to withdrawing from the World Health Organization to pardoning people convicted over the 2021 Capitol riot. Well, some of these executive orders could now face legal challenges. Well, President Trump says that these actions will rebalance the scales of justice during what he pledged would be the golden age of America.
The golden age of America begins right now. From this day forward, our country will flourish and be respected again all over the world. We will be the envy of every nation, and we will not allow ourselves to be taken advantage of any longer. During every single day of the Trump administration, I will very simply put America first.
The US President Donald Trump speaking there. Well, let's get some more analysis and reaction to what we've witnessed in Washington during the last 24 hours. We're joined by Greg Swenson, chairman of the Republicans Overseas UK. Welcome back, Greg. Great to have you with us. Also joined by Professor Francis Buckley, former speechwriter to President Trump and author of the book, The Roots of Liberalism. Great to have you both with us from Washington. Greg, let me start with you. I'm told you haven't had much sleep. You've been up all night following these historic moments and historic developments in D.C. Just tell me what's been going on.
Yes, a lot of optimism permeating here in Washington, Tom. It's been a really great weekend. I've been here for almost, I think, for 6 or 7 days, but really great time. But more importantly, a great sense of optimism. It's really electric here in D.C. and I think across America, frankly.
Professor Buckley, let me turn to you as a former Donald Trump speechwriter. I'd love to get your insights on the inaugural speech we heard yesterday at the Capitol. What were your main takeaways?
Well, it was a fighting speech, and perhaps deservedly so. It signaled that we're about to see an enormous sea change in America, in American culture. I think there's a great sense of a lifting of spirits in America. I mean, for so long, we've been subjected to a cacophony of voices, all of which tell us that this is a horrible country. We should be ashamed of ourselves, you know, et cetera, et cetera. That's what you got 24/7 from the media, from all the great hoobahs of America, and it's over, right? It's like we've just recovered from an enormous illness. It's like waking up after you've gotten over a flu, right? All of a sudden, things look possible again, and there is that great sense of optimism that your speaker referred to. So it's for I think most Americans are extremely happy that we're over the tyranny of a left-wing anti-Americanism in America. And where it's almost like a reversion to the country we remembered.
Sure, Professor, probably depends who you ask. But it was Donald Trump who said America's decline is over. I mean, that's sort of fairly dark language. There were a few dark comments in the inaugural speech. And when he says America's decline is over, I mean, looking at it from the outside, I mean, it begs the question, was America really in decline, Professor?
It was in decline in the sense that it didn't use all the power it had. It didn't unleash the optimism of American creativity and innovation. It specializes in putting stumbling blocks in the path of people who wanted to get ahead. And that's over, right? And, and so it's really like remembering an America of, some time prior to all of that, a happy, prosperous, individualistic country, and enough of all of the voices that said that we were horrible, terrible, and deserved to have nothing, deserved to be browbeaten by the people on the left, and that's over. I think people are extraordinarily tired of that. The funny thing about all of this is all those voices, they haven't gone away. They've just lost their audience.
Good point.
Sure. Greg, let me come to you. I mean, feel free to pick up on anything Professor Buckley's just said.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, though, as well. I mean, we've seen this long list of policy changes, executive orders that have been announced in the last 24 hours. I mean, an indication, perhaps, that President Trump is significantly more prepared for this job than he was 8 years ago.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think Professor Buckley made some really great points, and much of the optimism about President Trump and the new administration, is basically a reaction to the political and cultural move by the Democrats to the progressive radical left. And I think it's really set up the president nicely to just bring normalcy and common sense back. So, yeah, I think that, the optimism is there. And I think, we'll see some, immediate executive orders that will have immediate effects. I think the country voted for that. So you'll have, the border is probably the top of the list in terms of immediate action. I think that was refreshing in his speech, and also the signing of the orders yesterday, which he did very publicly. And I think it's kind of an exciting moment here in America to, in many ways, bring normalcy back, bring common sense back, but also bring that optimism. He mentioned manifest destiny, for example, which goes back to the early days of America. So, America is an optimistic place. You mentioned, Tom, that, it doesn't look like there's decline here, especially compared to many other countries, especially the UK where I live. But, it is in decline culturally in many ways, and even economically. The only reason we've outperformed the rest of the world is we borrowed $8 trillion in the last few years to stimulate the economy. That's not really sustainable. I think what President Trump will bring back is the opportunity for the private sector to deliver higher wages rather than the government. 4% decline in real wages is just not American, and that's what we got with the Biden administration.
And out of all of those dozens of executive orders that have been signed off, I mean, this is to both of you. Let me start with you, Professor Buckley. Did anything take you by surprise? Anything you weren't perhaps expecting to be announced quite so soon after he swore the oath of office?
Well, it was better than my fondest hopes of what would happen. I'm particularly delighted, for example, with the pardons given to the J6 rioters. I'm happy that not everybody got a complete pass, but I think it's a wonderful symbol that we should turn the page on the past, right? For the last couple of years, all we've heard from the left is insurrection, et cetera, and we know it wasn't really like that at all. I'm reminded of what happened when Carter issued a pardon for all of the draft dodgers in Canada. He was criticized a little bit for that, but the signal was, look, it's over. Vietnam is over. Turn the page, get over it. Come back to America. And there's a bit of that as well in the J6 rioters. Look, all of that's forgotten, right? The Dems tried to go to town on that, and let's forget about that, and let's remember that we're a united people. So the message I get from the pardons is unity.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things you've said, I believe, Professor, is that those 1,500 plus individuals faced what you described, I think, as a kangaroo court. I mean, do you really think they faced such very different treatment at the hands of the justice system, Professor?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of the people who went to the Capitol were people who were unhappy at the election, but weren't trying to overturn the government. I mean, how absurd, right? The governments are not overturned by people wearing funny hats, right, and face paint. So, that wasn't going to happen. It was a riot, and the rioters were punished. But that was 4 years ago, right? And those people who were in jail for many years, they deserve to get out. Right. And we should move on and forget about all of that. Forget about the Dem talking points. Right. Let's just get on with things again.
Greg, your thoughts on the pardoning and the commutation of the sentences of the 1,500 plus individuals charged with the January 6th riots?
Yeah, I think it was a wise move, and agree with Professor that it's time to move on. And remember, this is in a context of coming only a year after or 6 months after the summer riots, the summer of 2020, which the media and the left described as mostly peaceful protests, which was just absurd to say that. So much more destruction came from those Antifa and BLM riots. And then, of course, you have the pardons that Joe Biden executed, not only in the last month with the shameless pardon of his son, but then the last minute, I mean, literally minutes before his term ended yesterday, he pardoned another pile of relatives, his brother, his in-laws. on crimes that they haven't even been indicted for yet. So it just was absurd. I think the same thing you could say about the preemptive pardon of Anthony Fauci. What happened to trust to science? So I think, in that context, President Trump's pardons seem pretty mainstream and fairly acceptable to the voters, to the American public. So I think it's a good move. Time to move on. Yes, there were some dark moments in the speech, but I think that was a way to set up for his plans and his vision. He really felt it was important to describe the changes that we've seen in America over the last generation, and especially in the last 4 years. Yes, he was very critical of President Biden, who was sitting right next to him, but I think that was necessary to set up really set the stage for a really optimistic change in America.
Sure. Just with regard to the January 6th rioters, I'm going to be speaking to Alan Dershowitz in just a moment, President Trump's former attorney, to get some more analysis of that. Professor, I just want to ask you, just picking up on some of the points that Greg made, we get the impression on the outside the United States is a deeply divided country politically, extremely polarized, perhaps more polarized than at any point in any of our collective memories. What sort of overtures, what sort of messages did you get from President Trump's speech yesterday that he's going to unite this divided country and perhaps reach out to people who might not have voted for him, that might never have dreamt of voting for him?
Well, when you talk about a divided country, remember what you're getting outside of America is a very filtered view of what's going on here. You're getting a view filtered by the legacy media, and that doesn't really well represent America. The division in their mind is a division between them, people who think themselves entitled to run the country, and ordinary Americans. As for the ordinary Americans, I, like Trump, was thrilled by the members of American minorities who supported Trump, right? Hispanics, for example. That was a reaffirmation of the old American dream, and that's wonderful stuff. I think rather than imagine there is a great division, I think you should think that most Americans will wake up relieved that the tyranny of the left-wing media is over. The tyranny of groupthink, where we're required to get up and think about all the horrible things that America has done historically, that's over, right? And we're permitted to feel good about ourselves again. So I don't really see that kind of division that you're speaking of. I think you're seeing something filtered through a media which is wholly unrepresentative of America.
Okay, Greg, let me get your opinion, since you're an American who lives most of the time in London. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we are given, aren't we, that impression from the outside that the United States is this deeply divided country. The numbers would suggest it's a pretty divided country when you look at the outcome of recent elections. A split, sometimes very, very close in some states, so close that it necessitates recounts. Is the country divided? And what's Donald Trump going to do to perhaps rectify that?
I don't think it's nearly as divided as you would guess from what you see in the media. You typically see the headlines that talk about the divided country. Ronald Reagan won 56% of the vote in 1984, and even less in 1980, which was considered a landslide. But it is a divided country. Politically, it always has been. It's a two-party system. The fact that President Trump won 50% of the popular vote is pretty impressive, given the recent elections where, it's basically a 50-50 politically in terms of the two parties. But I think the country's come around. His top tick in terms of polling in his first term was 47. Now he's at 50. The transition is polling at 55. The American people are behind this. It's kind of, again, the return to common sense. The radical progressive left is only a small portion of the Democrat Party, but they ended up controlling the Democrat Party. That's why they were rejected by union workers, rejected by working people, rejected by blacks and Hispanics. So I think you're seeing a much more unified country. Even those people who didn't really like President Trump, maybe they don't like the way he messages, but they still voted for him, or maybe even if they didn't, they understand that this is a great opportunity for America right now.
Yeah, just looking at some of the executive orders, I mean, immigration seems to have been a really common theme to quite a number of them. I mean, what were your, Professor, let me ask you, I mean, what really stood out for you as being the most significant of these executive orders, which included revoking birthright citizenship, declaring an emergency on the southern border? What really stood out for you?
Well, symbolically, the big one was the J6 pardons, right? Coming right after the pardons Joe Biden gave to the Biden crime family. That was wonderfully refreshing. Apart from that, there was a tone of nationalism in all of this. The executive orders about the border, for example. Nationalism is, in the world of Donald Trump and the Republican Party, is a positive force that speaks to not so much the exclusion of non-Americans, but our positive duties to Americans, right? I mean, if you want to have a decent welfare state, you can say, for example, gosh, there's somebody suffering and we should take care of it. But you'll get a lot more mileage politically and morally if you say it's intolerable that an American should have to suffer like that. So, nationalism is something which creates bonds of affection and responsibility to all Americans. And the Democrats who try to erase that, both by opening the borders and by denigrating America and nationalism, those were people who were profoundly destructive of every charitable impulse Americans have.
Greg, I mean, hardly surprising, is it, that immigration should have been so significant a theme, so prominent a theme in those executive orders when it was so prominent on the campaign trail, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's no surprise. So much of this was predictable. And I think what happened with versus 2016, when immigration was also at the top of the list, it didn't really affect as many Americans as it does now. So what the Democrats did was quite radical, opening up the border deliberately and then moving those illegal migrants into cities and states around the country. So then every state became a border state. And I think you'll never see that in the headlines in the corporate media in the UK, for example. It's always, President Trump is racist because he doesn't like immigration. That's not true, obviously. And that's why Hispanics really supported President Trump this time around. The United States, is the only country in the world, or at least in the West, where sex trafficking across the border, moving young girls across the border for sex trafficking, is legal and encouraged. And that is going to stop. It stopped yesterday. And I think that's the refreshing moment for Americans who see the humanitarian disaster at the border. It's not just that it's taxing on local municipalities because of the illegal migrants are very expensive to look after. It's not just that. It's the humanitarian crisis and the sex trafficking. And I think there's a lot of sympathy for that in the UK because of the recent, the recent rape gang and the grooming scandal. So this is something that Americans are sensitive about. And I think that President Trump understood that. And I think most Americans should be really happy to see that he's going to end that, specifically the sex trafficking of young women, but also just the open border, which creates so much really destruction in the American cities and states that have to pay for it.
Okay, and we've got these pledges of mass deportations involving the military. Professor, is that talk, or is that actually going to happen, do you think?
Are you referring to what?
The mass deportations that have been promised involving the military.
We can but hope. I don't know technically what it would be like to have mass deportations. I don't know what that would involve in terms of police action and so forth. I think it's a worthwhile goal.
Greg, what are your thoughts? Does that sound like...
Yeah, I think, but recall also that Trump has modified what he said about all of this. He's not prepared, for example, to send people, the children of Americans who are here, without legal sanction. he's not prepared to start going around deporting those kinds of people. But if you're a criminal, right, that's basically where we're going to start seeing that. We're going to start seeing, as much as possible, people who've been convicted of crime being deported fast. It's been going on, under all administrations. But the Democrats in sanctuary cities seem to have a love affair with foreign criminals, which is, I guess, about the most effective way you have of thumbing your nose at ordinary Americans.
Greg, what are your thoughts about these mass deportations?
It's a great point, Professor and Tom. Look, these are not going to be, knocking on doors of families and deporting grandmothers like the press likes to suggest. He's starting with the criminals, and that is important. The capacity for mass deportations is around 400,000 a year, maybe 600,000 if they added some more resources. So this is not going to be some mass exodus of 10 million illegal migrants that have come in the country the last 4 years. But it is going to be the criminals. The Lake and Riley Act, which was passed by a bipartisan, Senate and House, there were 7 Democratic senators who did not vote for that, which is crazy. Lake and Riley was a nursing student who was killed by an illegal migrant. Not only had he broken the law by entering the country illegally, but he'd been arrested in New York and, of course, released by one of the Soros-backed district attorneys in Alvin Bragg specifically. And so, you have this kind of rejection of just the insanity of having criminals and protecting them, not just because they were illegal migrants, but they were convicted of crimes either in their home countries or in the United States. It's just common sense. So I think the deportations, which are polling very well, even mass deportations were polling at 53% with Hispanics in Arizona, which is a border state. So look, this is I think a very positive time for the president to take action. And again, set up by the radical left progressive policies of the Biden years. And it just makes President Trump look almost like a centrist in bringing common sense to our border.
Yeah, and maybe there'll be more executive orders to come. I mean, already Monday was described as a blizzard by some of executive orders. Just lastly, Professor, let me turn back to you. I was just listening to Greg there using this language, common sense, on more than one occasion. It seems to be very much part of the lexicon of the new administration as well. Common sense ideas, common sense policies. I mean, is that something you're picking up on? And is there any other new language that we should be listening out for from the new, the second Trump administration?
The opposite of common sense is ideology, right? So when you say you're the common sense party, what you're doing is you're labeling the other party as prisoners of ideology. And when you think about, for example, the left's reaction to the fires in Los Angeles, right, and the seeming inability to care about people, to prioritize, small fish over real people, it sounds like we've got a real ideological problem. So, that's going to be a popular one. The abandonment of ideas like left wing and right wing, in favor of common sense, right? If you're in favor of common sense solutions, you're in favor of the common good. So if you're asking for other kinds of labels out there, the common good would be one. The opposite of the common good is something which gives priority to one race or one sex, right? Which is, again, the Democratic Party. And those kinds of ideas, they don't even count as moral theories, right? If a moral theory, if it's anything, should be universal. It should be, one rule for everybody. But the Democratic Party is one which doesn't believe in that. It's it's not an all lives matter party. It's a Black Lives Matter party. So certain people count and other people don't count. So, the spirit of inclusiveness associated with the common good is also something we'll hear from the Trump administration.
Okay, well, I'd love to talk to you both more. We're going to have to leave it there, though. Thank you very much indeed to you,
Thanks,
Professor
Tom.
Francis Buckley, and thank you to you as well, Greg Swenson. Great to have you both with us. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump has pardoned nearly all of the January 6th defendants, fulfilling a promise he made during an inaugural parade to sign an executive order on the matter. Well, this decision resulted in the release of more than 1,500 individuals charged in connection with the Capitol Hill attack. Well, Trump had previously vowed to act very quickly on this on his first day in office, to pardon those he referred to as hostages. Well, for more, we can speak now to Alan Dershowitz, President Trump's former attorney, who joins us now from Florida. Thank you very much. Great to have you with us again here on Al Arabiya News. Some sentences have been commuted. Some have been given full, complete and unconditional pardons. Do you get the sense there was much evaluation of each of these 1,500 plus cases, or is this more of a sort of a blanket decision?
Well, a little of both. There were individual evaluations to see which category they fell into. If they were involved in any kind of violence, they were not pardoned. They were commuted. If they haven't been tried yet, they fell into another category. The president ordered the Justice Department not to prosecute them. I have one criticism of the president's statement. He shouldn't have called them hostages. These are people who were convicted erroneously, wrongly. They're not like the babies and children being held by Hamas in Gaza. So to make that comparison, I think diminishes the suffering of totally, completely, absolutely innocent babies and children and grandparents that are being held mercilessly in Gaza. These folks were improperly convicted. And I'm glad that those who got pardons did, and those that got commutations did, and those that got agreements not to prosecute did. I think it was ultimately the right decision, because the decisions made after the January 6th were very political in nature. Remember, there were comparable protests in many other parts of the country about other events where more property damage was caused and almost nobody was prosecuted. So this was an attempt to bring about some degree of equality.
OK, but when you hear someone like the Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer saying, quote, Donald Trump is ushering in a golden age for people to break the law and attempt to overthrow the government. I mean, obviously 140 police officers were injured, a lot of people endangered during January 6th. I mean, how do you respond to a comment like that?
Well, he should have made it as well about President Biden's decision to preemptively pardon anybody who might have been involved in Biden corruption, including his brother and his son and others. The presidential power to commute under the Constitution is unlimited. And of course, the commutation power can be seen as encouraging people to commit crime in the hope that they'll get commutations, but that operates on both sides of the political spectrum. And President Biden's decision to grant preemptory pardons in hours before he left office certainly gave President Trump the opening to give pardons as well. So we're seeing the pardon power used pretty broadly by both sides, both Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah, but if we put politics to one side and just look at the facts of what's happened since January 6, 2021, you've got a police officer like Michael Fanone, who lost consciousness. He had a heart attack because someone hit him with a stun gun on that day. He's spent the last 4 years worried about his safety because he's been receiving death threats. His family has been receiving death threats. I mean, very difficult to imagine how they must be feeling today.
Well, imagine how the woman who was a guard in an Israeli prison who was raped and threatened by a man who had committed 2 multiple murders, who is being released now as part of this extorted negotiation with Israel. Imagine how she feels. That's what happens when you have either commutations, pardons, or deals based on extortions and kidnapping. We don't live in a perfect world. And unfortunately, we're seeing this in all parts of the world and in all sides of the political spectrum. I feel terrible for any of the victims of crime who feel that no justice has been achieved, but you have to apply that equally all over the political and ideological and religious spectrum.
OK, well, does this mean, just to help us understand what happens next, we've got these more than 1,500 people who've been variously pardoned or had their sentences commuted, some of them starting to walk free, we gather, already. When can we expect all of them to have walked free?
In a very short period of time. The ones that pardoned are free today. I mean, they can walk out of prison. They don't need any further judicial remedy. They have been pardoned. They need to get a certificate that indicates they've been pardoned, then they can walk out. Those who have been commuted may have some different situation because they haven't been vindicated. There can still be some constraints on them resulting from the commutation, depending on the nature of the commutation. But I think we'll see actions on this very, very quickly, and we'll see people, some good, some bad, some indifferent, getting freed, some for crimes that deserve very, very serious punishment.
Not everyone was in prison, were they? Some people got community service, some people were detained at home, some people had to pay fines. Just a small detail here, but will people who paid a fine get a refund, do you think?
Probably. If they've been pardoned, they will probably get it refunded unless there's something in the pardon, which could be, that says, no, the fines are not going to be refunded. We're only pardoning them for their liberty. But I think people who get complete pardons, it's as if they didn't commit the crime at all. Commutations are very, very different. And the Justice Department will have to make individualized decisions because every single one of them has to get a certificate that indicates what their exact status is. So even if this was done in a blanket way, the individuals have to be treated as individuals. And that will happen probably in the next few days.
And just to be clear, one thing you were saying earlier, I just want to pick up on it and clarify. I mean, Donald Trump called this whole case of the treatment of these 1,500 plus individuals a grave national injustice. I'm just wondering, were they really given such very different treatment, do you think, by the Justice Department than ordinary people would have been had they, for example, attacked public property or attacked officers of the law?
Yeah, without a doubt, that's true. Black Lives Matter people who caused more damage in some Western states got no prosecution. Democratic operatives, prosecutors let people go free. There was a sense of real lawfare and violation of the equality function of the rule of law. So I don't think the people who beat up and hurt and maybe even participated in producing the death of innocent people may not have been treated unfairly, but the people who just walked into the Capitol to protest and were guilty perhaps of trespassing, some of them were welcomed in, they were waved in by the police. There are videotapes of that. So you have to ask about each case individually. And I think the president at least looked at each case as to whether it fell into a particular category. As to those that did no harm at all and just took a protest a little bit too far, they were not treated fairly compared to people in the Black Lives Matter movement and other movements, or people who are protesting today on college campuses and sometimes threatening and harassing and hurting people. We have to have equal treatment across the board, regardless of the nature of the protests, the party of the person. This is a movement in the right direction, coupled with the president's abolition of DEI, which has been a terrible, terrible program producing great inequality in the name of equality. That's over now, and that's a very good thing for America.
I just want to pick up on what you were saying at the very beginning of this interview, talking about the pardons that the outgoing president issued as he walked out of the door of the White House, literally. I mean, you're suggesting, and others have suggested as well, it's making a bit of a mockery of the whole presidential pardon privilege. I mean, do you think it's the face of things to come that an outgoing president is basically going to have to issue a whole lot of pardons to prevent them and people close to them from facing some sort of catch-up or some sort of vengeance in the future?
Well, that depends on what this administration does. In his inauguration speech, President Trump promised the end of lawfare. I invented the term lawfare back in the late 1960s. It's my term. And it's been so terribly misused. And if lawfare isn't used by this administration, if this administration calls it straight and only prosecutes people without regard to who they are, what party they belong to, we won't see the need for preemptive pardons. But if lawfare continues, we will see both parties using pardon as an antidote to lawfare.
And just lastly, I mean, looking back at January 6th, and just to wrap up this segment, it's been described by some people as being one of the darkest days in modern US history. Do you think, you know, as some in the Biden administration suggested, we're going to see over the next 4 years an attempt to sort of rewrite exactly what happened on that day?
In a democracy, you can't rewrite history because the media has the right to present its alternative narrative. I think that January 6th will always be seen by decent people in a negative light, but it was exaggerated. It wasn't an insurrection. It was a protest gone wrong and exaggerated, just like I think the Black Lives Matter protests were in Oregon and other places. There's equal fault on all sides here. And what we have to do is move us back to a time where protests are fine. Indeed, they're encouraged. It's part of our First Amendment to have protests, but not violent protests and not intimidation and not threats. So I'm hoping that the new administration will keep its word about the end of lawfare and move us toward more democratic forms of protests and more equal application of the law. I think that's possible. I think we learned a very, very hard lesson from both January 6th and the application of lawfare, and I hope that lesson is learned and applied.
All right, Alan Dershowitz, great to have you with us. Thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, turning our attention now to the Middle East, and in a controversial move, US President Donald Trump has lifted sanctions on far-right Israeli settler groups and individuals who are accused of violence against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. That's according to the new White House administration. Well, in 2019, during his first term, President Trump reversed the long-standing US position that Israeli settlements are illegal. That's a policy that was later restored by President Joe Biden. Well, let's get some more analysis. We can speak to David Hale, former US ambassador to Lebanon and former US special envoy for peace in the Middle East during the Obama administration. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I should add, you also served as US ambassador to Pakistan and Jordan. You're also Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. We have another Trump administration before us now. Do you expect any significant shift, first of all, with regards to Washington's approach to Israeli and Palestinian affairs?
Yes, I do suspect that there will be a shift, although it's important to underscore that there was really an unprecedented combination of forces between the outgoing and the incoming administrations to secure this ceasefire deal in Gaza, which was a really good sign. But I think the philosophy of the Trump administration is likely to, I think, sort of widen the aperture, widen the lens, and look at the entire region, particularly at Iran, and how the United States can really take full advantage of the fact that the campaign against Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran has really reversed the fortunes of Tehran. This is a major opportunity for them.
Indeed. I mean, the tectonic plates have been shifting in the Middle East these last few months, significantly in the last few months. And I just want to pick up on that point you were making about how both administrations were involved in this three-phase ceasefire. I mean, that's significant from the point of view of continuity, if nothing else, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, it's also a sign that the administration really wanted to try to have this conflict put behind it so it didn't have to get bogged down in it on day one. Unfortunately, it's going to require persistent engagement to see it through and avoid the chance of Hamas exploiting the gaps. I think the first phase is going to be, I'm not saying it's easy, they're going to be spoilers, but I think both sides are committed to seeing through the exchange of prisoners and hostages. The real hard stuff comes in the subsequent phases because those issues will touch upon the real future of Gaza. And as we've seen in the debate in Israel, that's not even resolved within Israel, much less with the Palestinians.
And when it comes to the relationships with the key organizations and the key figures in the region, and I'm talking notably about Israeli-Palestinian affairs, I mean, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, very quick to congratulate President Trump on his return. I'm just wondering whether, there's the perception perhaps in Ramallah that Benjamin Netanyahu is going to be given more favorable treatment. I mean, do you think that's a fair fear that they've got?
Well, obviously, the relationship between the United States and Israel and whoever is the leader of Israel is special and has its own characteristics, obviously very close. The relationship with the Palestinians is different. And I think it'll be really, frankly, up to the Palestinians to demonstrate that they have something to offer, that they're not just going to sit back and wait for peace and statehood to come to them, that they're going to help the United States and other partners build a new path. Because frankly, after all that's happened, there really isn't the kind of trust and confidence needed on either side to go back to the old formulas of Madrid and Oslo. There has to be new thinking for the new realities. And we have to, if I were advising anyone, I would say, encourage the Palestinians to come up with some new thinking about how we go from here.
Yeah, we heard in the last 24 hours President Trump saying, quote, "This isn't our war, it's their war, but I'm not confident." He seems to be suggesting this ceasefire deal might not hold between the Palestinians and the Israelis. What do you think he's getting at here?
I don't know if I want to try to analyze that. I'm obviously not in his circle, so I don't know for sure. I think it's a natural analytical point that any ceasefire like this is relatively fragile, and the history of broken promises between these two sides is a long and storied one. I think that it's also important for him and the United States to maintain the leverage that we demonstrated and that he demonstrated with his threats. That there would be, a big price to pay for failure to reach an agreement, that we hold them to it through that kind of approach and to not take the United States for granted. So you might look at it through that prism.
In the last couple of days, we've seen pictures of civilians returning to destroyed homes in Gaza. Many of them, really tragic scenes. We've heard President Truss suggesting that fantastic things could be built there in Gaza. And I'm just wondering whether, you can help us perhaps to try to understand what you think he might have in mind for Gaza.
Well, I mean, he prides himself on his visions for development of property based on his history and his first profession. So I don't think it's unusual for someone like that to look at a situation like this and wonder about the potentialities. And obviously, if the key question of security and governance, which really go hand in hand for the future of Gaza, find some sort of stable approach, then the key question is going to be, how do you move beyond the immediate relief needs of the Palestinians to actually rebuilding their lives? And I think it's very positive for the president to hold out a vision for redeveloping Gaza and to contrast what it was like under Hamas and what it could be like in the future in terms of development and unlocking the potential of the people of Gaza, which is quite considerable.
And when you look at the new lineup in the Trump administration, especially when it comes to foreign policy issues, I mean, what sort of a team have we got in front of us? Any names, any individuals that stand out and that perhaps might bring a fresh pair of eyes and therefore a fresh approach to some of these decades-old problems in the region?
Well, I think the president himself is going to be his principal advisor, and he is obviously, by definition, an unconventional thinker. He's not going to be trapped by the inherited, concepts and bound by past approaches of past presidents, many of which only made modest progress at best. Many of them, in fact, were failures. So I don't think he's going to plunge in with these grand, comprehensive peace strategies. I think instead he's going to ask and look for the parties themselves in the region, not just Israelis and Palestinians, but Saudis and the Emiratis, Egyptians, Jordanians, everybody. What can they do? And how can the United States fit into their strategies for building peace? And of course, so many of them are focused on Iran, which is where I think the president will be focused. To your question, I think Secretary of State Rubio, who's already in office, has said all the kinds of things I anyway would expect him to say about taking a tough line on Iran. So I think that, as I said at the beginning, is going to be a bit of a recalibration to build out from a strategy that puts pressure on Iran and then hopes to bring the rest of the region into the scope of peace.
Yeah, you mentioned Senator Rubio, now the Secretary of State. I mean, the fact he was given unanimous support by the Senate. I mean, what do you read into that?
Well, he's a member of the club. You know, he was a senator, a respected senator, and had been there for a while, had some seniority. So I think it's a reflection of the respect that and regard that how the Senate has for him. Secondly, I mean, he's a serious guy, and his performance in the testimony that he gave during his confirmation hearings showed he has a grasp of the world and an ability to be eloquent and thoughtful about approaches to it. So I think everyone is quite confident in his leadership. Of course, he's got a lot of other people around, as I think you're hinting at in the White House, that with any Secretary of State, you have to be part of a team. And so those pieces of it will still, I think, be a work in progress.
I mean, clearly we've got 4 fascinating years ahead of us. And with regards to what's happening in the Middle East, developments had already begun these last few months. You allude to Iran. We've seen the toppling of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. We've seen the demise of significant leaders in Hamas, in Hezbollah, in a number of organizations. I mean, just to sort of sum up, really, I mean, do all of the dots, when you join them, does everything lead back to Iran, or are there other factors at play here as well?
I do see Iran as the major challenge. Up until this campaign, they had been setting the agenda and the tone and the pace for the rest of us. We were all responding. The Israelis have changed that. So now the question for an incoming administration is, how do you go from here? And there are other issues. I'm not saying it's all about Iran, but Iran is able to exploit the weaknesses and vulnerabilities that we all know exist in the Middle East, the states that are weak, the issues that are unresolved. And so we need multifaceted approaches, one that's focused on Iran, but also strategies that deal with local problems, whether it's in Lebanon, to really bring home the reorientation of that country away from Iran, whether it's to deal with this emerging situation in Syria. Turkey is ascendant. These are all questions that the administration is going to have to knit together into a strategy that makes sense.
And knowing the region as you do, Ambassador Hale, are you optimistic?
Well, you know, in my profession, you have to have some optimism or you wouldn't get up in the morning. But I think also you have to be realistic. And so I would urge that we not go back to dreaming about grand dreams of comprehensive peace, much as we all want to get there, and instead rebuilding the trust and confidence needed between Palestinians and Israelis to find something that's feasible.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Great to have you with us again on Al Arabiya News. Ambassador David Hale, thanks again.
Thank you.
That is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. And until then, bye-bye.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deep fake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
my campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on The Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Delhi. India's capital, Delhi is known for its captivating sights and rich history. The city is beautified with mosques, forts, and monuments, and the popular landscaped gardens. There is a bustling Old Delhi and the well-planned New Delhi, each with their own attractions and both worth the exploration. One of the most popular in Delhi is the Jama Masjid Mosque. You must catch the breathtaking view of Old Delhi that you'll see from the top of the minaret in the mosque. The long and winding strenuous climb to the stairs will all be worth it. The Jama Masjid is indeed a treasure of the old city and is the largest mosque in India. It was built in 1650 and in fact took 13 years to build. The Red Fort, Delhi's most famous monument, is one of the most popular remnants of the Mughal emperor's rule. It stands for a stretch of up to over 2 kilometers or 1.2 miles. It was built in 1638 to keep out invaders from entering the city. The Red Fort is a great way to see the very ancient historic side of the city. Another historical site worth a visit is Gandhi Smriti. It is where Mahatma Gandhi, the father of the nation, was assassinated on January 30, 1948. The legendary man lived in the house for 144 days up until the time of his death. You can visit these places as they are open to the public. Historical feats aside, there are also many places in Delhi for sports, recreation, food, and shopping. There is also the Chandni Chowk, the main street of Old Delhi. It's a shocking contrast to the wide, orderly streets of New Delhi. Vehicles of all sorts crowd the space. With the pedestrians and animals, there are cars, cycle rickshaws, and hand-pulled carts everywhere you look. But the trip is worth the narrow, winding lines full of things to buy: affordable jewelry, fabrics, and electronics. Plus, you can also sample the local street food here. Last but not least are of course the famous Lodi Gardens. It's a fitting balance to the bustling city life in Old and New Delhi. It's a serene retreat from city life, a place to rest, reflect, and relieve yourself from a tiring trip. Tourists also visit to see the birds, eat along the restaurants, or simply enjoy the nature escape.
At Al Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Al Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome to this special interview on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Now, during the past week, we've heard the US President-elect Donald Trump suggesting that he'd consider using military force to gain control of the Panama Canal and Greenland, as well as economic force to acquire Canada. Well, today we ask, what do we read into this? And is Donald Trump serious about growing the US footprint? And if so, how might he go about it? Well, we're joined now by Donald Trump's former National Security Advisor, John Bolton, who also served as the US Ambassador to the UN. Mr. Bolton, thank you very much indeed for being with us. From what we're hearing, it does seem like Trump 2.0 could be a stunning departure from decades-old norms about territorial integrity. And I'd like to start by talking about Greenland, which is, of course, an autonomous Danish territory. Denmark is a long-time ally of the United States. It's a founding NATO member. Do you think there's a case here for the United States taking control of Greenland?
Well, let me say first, there is zero chance that the United States is going to use force to do that. And the way Trump approaches issues like this, especially in such a public fashion, leads people, unfortunately, to think that the whole idea is kind of bizarre. But let me just say, I looked at this question very carefully in 2019 when it first arose, when I was National Security Advisor, and the United States has long had significant security interest in Greenland. We go back to World War II, just as one example. Franklin Roosevelt put American military forces on Greenland at the invitation of the local government before Pearl Harbor, after the Danish government fell to the Nazis. because of the importance of the North Atlantic convoys. In the Cold War, it was quite important. So there's a long history here. And how to resolve the current threats in the Arctic from Russia and China, especially as global warming results in more maritime passages through the Arctic Ocean, is serious not just for the United States, but for Canada and the entire NATO alliance. I think there are ways that we can have quiet conversations with Denmark and the home rule government in Greenland. I don't think it's appropriate to negotiate this in a football stadium under spotlights. And I think that quiet diplomacy is the way to go here, because I do think this serious issue needs serious consideration.
Okay, so it sounds like you don't entirely agree with the means, but do you agree with the end goal, which is, did you conclude in 2019 that, yes, indeed, the United States should acquire Greenland?
Well, we didn't get to that point because Trump blew the negotiations up. We hadn't even really started by talking about it publicly and putting the government of Denmark, democratically elected government of Denmark, in an impossible political position. This is not how you negotiate with friends and allies. It's one thing to send a signal to the Chinese and the Russians, but you don't put friends in a corner up against the wall. Look, I'd be satisfied ultimately with full American sovereignty over Greenland. I don't think that's going to happen. And I think it's important, as my former boss, Jim Baker, used to tell me all the time, keep your eyes on the prize. The prize here is security for the United States and its treaty allies, including Denmark. It's not necessarily sovereignty. We have an existing bilateral treaty with Denmark, the Defense of Greenland Treaty from 1951, that could be a vehicle. I think there are many possibilities here, but it's a sensitive subject, as people I'm sure can understand, and the way you deal with subjects like that is privately.
Okay, another sensitive subject, the Panama Canal. What do you make of what Donald Trump's been saying about that?
Well, again, there's not going to be any force used against the Panama Canal. It's so typically the case. Trump takes an issue where there's a grain of importance in what he's saying, and you lose sight of the real focus because of his bizarre approach. Panama Canal is vital for American national and economic security, and really for world trade and economic prosperity in troubled times. I think many Americans, many people around the world, are concerned by the Chinese effort to gain control of sensitive port facilities and sensitive maritime locations like the operation of the Panama Canal. I do think there are issues with what China is up to, and I do think that it's legitimate for the United States and others who depend on the canal to raise this with the Panamanian government. That's what we should do, again, privately, quietly. And just make sure that the Chinese operators, Chinese involvement, which should be minimal to begin with, does not pose a threat.
Former U.S. ambassador to Panama, who you may know, John Feely, told U.S. media that taking back the Panama Canal would require a war. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, it would require steps the United States is not going to take. This is Trump blowing steam and trying to confuse people. His supporters say this is good negotiation technique. I think it's bad negotiation technique. You don't put the government of Panama in this kind of trouble. Look, last week, the president of Panama said he wanted to work with the United States to cut off the flow of illegal immigration from South America. People walking through Panama to get to the Rio Grande border between the U.S. and Mexico. He said that America's natural border is the Darien Gap. And for Donald Trump, who thinks illegal immigration is one of his biggest priorities, this is a statement, really remarkable statement by the president of Panama that showed a willingness to work with us to address the problem of illegal immigration. I hope Trump hasn't blown that up as well. It's one thing to be the center of attention, which Donald Trump always likes to be. It's something else to accomplish your objectives, and you shouldn't let your self-esteem get in the way of getting those objectives. Again, keep your eyes on the prize. Let's work with Panama on this Chinese operator question. I think we can resolve it.
No doubt Beijing and Moscow taking a very keen interest in everything that's being said by the president-elect. We've heard the Kremlin saying that President Putin is open to talks with Donald Trump. Do you think those talks will be productive? And is that something you'd advise him to do, were you still his national security advisor?
Well, I'd be very worried because I think the talks are likely to focus on Ukraine, and I'm concerned about what the Trump administration policy toward Ukraine will be. I have to say, Trump's remarks on Greenland and Panama, saying he wouldn't rule out the use of force to achieve America's objectives, play into the hands of the likes of Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping could say, well, you know, Taiwan is important for our national security, and I don't rule out the use of force there either. It's another demonstration Trump doesn't think of the broader consequences of what he says. In this case, very harmful to the interest of America and some of its best allies.
Some people are saying we're seeing a much more emboldened Donald Trump than we did when he first took office back in 2017. Some are calling this the no restraints maximum Trump, and of course with Elon Musk at his side. What does all of this tell us about how the next 4 years could unfold, Mr. Bolton?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily extrapolate from these kinds of remarks. Trump is famous for talking and then not following through. He's going to have a lot on his plate, starting on Inauguration Day when he tries a massive campaign to expel illegal immigrants from the country. We'll see how that goes. I think it's a lot less clear what's going to happen than some people are projecting, but I do think the second term is likely to be a roller coaster ride domestically and internationally, much like the first Trump term. He does not have a philosophy. He does not do grand strategy on national security. He doesn't do policy as we normally understand that term. His decisions are transactional, anecdotal, ad hoc. And that leads to continued uncertainty. It's bad for America's friends. The only hope I have is it's even worse for our enemies.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about this new, some are calling it a new sort of imperialist agenda there by Donald Trump, threatening to seize the Panama Canal and Greenland, perhaps by force, perhaps not, as we've been saying, threatening to use economic coercion to pressure Canada to become the 51st state of the United States. I mean, is there a coherent foreign policy plan here, a master plan, or do you get the impression that Donald Trump and Elon Musk are shooting from the hip?
There is no master plan. That's beyond Trump's capability. This is one thing after another. I think the motivating factor in the case of Canada is that Trump does not like Justin Trudeau, the prime minister, the outgoing prime minister. And in Trump's mind, and he said this publicly, he thinks that if he has good relations with the head of a foreign government, then the United States has good relations with that country. And vice versa. If relations are bad at a personal level, so are state-to-state relations. That's a gross oversimplification, but that's how Trump sees it. I'm not sure Trump can pronounce the word imperialist. That's not what's motivating his thinking. It's about publicity and comments that are being made to him by people who really don't have much of an understanding of the wider world.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We're out of time. Appreciate that. John Bolton, former National Security Advisor and a former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
At Al Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Al Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Welcome to the show. I'm Riz Khan. The annual cost of cybercrime is expected to reach $10 trillion next year. To put that figure into context, in terms of GDP, it would be the third biggest economy in the world after the US and China. That's why countries from Australia to China, the UK and US are racing to tighten up their cybersecurity laws. And it's why the UN is expected to pass a landmark cyber treaty in the coming weeks. From deepfakes and disinformation to hacks and attacks on infrastructure, healthcare and security networks, cybercrime is becoming the #1 challenge for law enforcement and intelligence agencies. And artificial intelligence is already changing the rules of the game. Now, our increasingly connected digital world makes us all more vulnerable to criminal gangs and state-sponsored hackers who can access our data and devices. Imagine them taking control of your bank account, your electrical vehicle, and even your pacemaker. Interpol is the world's largest police force. Formed in the aftermath of the First World War, it was established to combat an increasing threat from international crime. Collaboration between countries allowed crime fighting to extend beyond national boundaries. And today, the organization has almost 200 member countries. When it comes to fighting cybercrime, that original principle of collaboration is more important than ever. I met with Dr. Neil Jaton, Interpol's Director of Cybercrime, for an insight into the agency's battle against the hackers. Dr. Jaton, great to have some time with you.
Thanks for having me.
Now, you know, there's this romantic image of what Interpol is. It's like that kind of agents in coffee shops in romantic places like Rome and Paris having secret meetings. It's like the CIA, MI6, I guess. How real is that?
It's spot on. It's exactly like that. It's not really like that. But I don't know what a lot of agencies, you have this romantic feeling for it, and then about what you think in your head, what it's going to be, and then you come in to an agency. So I've been here for 2 months, and I didn't really have too many preconceived notions because I've been a federal agent for a long time. So I've kind of been in this space. But I will say that it has been an amazing experience just for the 2 months. And I think the strength of Interpol and the strength of my team within the Cybercrime Directorate is having, there's only roughly 40 to 50 people. There are only 2 Americans. So you're looking at a wide array of cultures and people and bringing all sorts of strengths from their walks of life.
Tell me what your son said when you said you're joining Interpol.
Yeah. Well, my son was very excited. We were actually watching an action movie at that time when so I was living in D.C., and he was like, oh, like that, like James Bond. And I said, no, not exactly. And I explained kind of what I was doing, and he was less than impressed with me. But he was also kind of aware of the romantic notions of, being a federal agent and how that is. And he was like, yeah, you're still just dad,
And I guess the cybercrime area on which you focus, you head, is even more that kind of ethereal area.
I mean, it's so emerging and evolving. It is very, very tough. And I don't think when you come into law enforcement, I don't think most people, maybe nowadays, but when I came in 15 years ago, it wasn't to do cyber crimes or crimes, involving computers. You wanted to knock down doors. You wanted to put people behind, bars. You wanted to really be high speed. And I think nowadays the crime, you can almost just get rid of the word cyber and just call it crime, because there's not a lot of crime that's really not connected now to a computer, to a phone or some other network system. You really see that. So I do think that as you progress through your career, you may have come in saying, I want to combat this type of crime, but it's very clear that you're going to have some sort of cyber background to be successful.
And yet the Hollywood image is that cyber criminals have the chance to take down entire systems. Airports can be shut down, traffic lights can be changed, right. Like the Die Hard 4 kind of thing. Any reality in that?
I think everything's kind of based a little bit in reality, and then movies are, amplified to, a much higher magnitude. But can bad guys target critical infrastructure and be successful? Sure. You looked at the Colonial Pipeline incident in 2021, the U.S.'s largest fuel pipeline, and what the bad guys were able to do was go through the billing system. And you would think that something maybe as innocuous as that wouldn't have such detrimental effects, but it did. The Colonial Pipeline had to shut down the entire company to contain the breach. Large lines at the pump, concern about fuel availability. So it is a reality, but it's not all doom and gloom. I will say that every day we have these sort of conferences where we come together. We talk about how do we improve cybersecurity. So I think we're making great strides.
How did you react when the CrowdStrike incident that happened. It was faulty software, so it wasn't really malicious, but I think it exposed a lot of vulnerabilities.
So for us, we are not in the critical infrastructure cybersecurity vulnerability business necessarily. We're in the law enforcement business. For any sort of incident, whether it's a crowd strike, that wasn't quite, malicious, through something that is, we really are dependent on the member countries' law enforcement to reach out to us for assistance. Or in some cases, maybe we'll have some intelligence through some partners that we're able to push out.
The interesting thing about that incident, though, was that it opened the door for criminals to bounce in quickly.
That's right. I mean, they're always looking. And so, again, I think you have all these national security agencies working diligently trying to identify these vulnerabilities to make it much more difficult for hackers.
It does suggest, though, that the fact they can react quickly to what was not a malicious attack and get their malicious attack in, that they're quite ahead of the game.
I do think it's a little bit of a cat and mouse game. I think that the incentive for the bad guys is financial, so that when you are really focused on making a buck, this is how you earn your living. Of course, you're going to be very, very aggressive in identifying these threats. But I will say that law enforcement, Interpol, is forward-looking, looking at emerging technology, looking at the emerging threats, and trying to try to stay right with the criminals.
As director of cybercrime at Interpol, of course, you get to see the extremes, how bad things could be.
Right.
How worried should we be as citizens?
No, I think you should be concerned. I mean, obviously with emerging technology, but AI, quantum computing, those are obviously some issues. But just as being a parent of a child who I'm finally allowing to have a smartphone for the first time as a teenager, we have had to have sit-down conversations with them about the threats. And I'm like, your dad is the director, cybercrime director at Interpol. You cannot be doing these things. You cannot have this app. You're too young. But I'll just say that I think schools are doing a much better job of understanding the issues as well. Parents should take some responsibility, on themselves too.
For many of us, Hollywood is that lens, and cybercrime is seen as young people, sometimes in basements. They're doing things that, from their homes, effectively.
Right, in their basements behind their keyboard.
Is it real?
Yeah, I'm assuming, that is quite a bit. I mean, but also it runs the gamut. You may think like, oh, it's a 50-year-old grizzled, person just down in the basement. But no, as you see in some of these ransomware incidents, they're youth. They're not even of legal age, and they're causing this sort of mayhem. So yeah, it's just somebody being able to the ability to have that tech savviness and also the will to actually cause harm. We've seen criminals all ages.
Beyond these, institutions and documents that come out through the UN and so forth, in general, how well is the world keeping up with the threat of cybersecurity, on cybersecurity?
I think well. I mean, obviously, we're always going to. It's really, I think, country dependent. As Interpol, my goal is to bring up those that maybe not as cyber mature, to bring them up to a level so that they can defend themselves, defend their their citizens. I do think it's improving.
And then you do need legislation, because one of the biggest frustrations in traditional crime is legal loopholes or the lack of legal infrastructure to be able to lock the bad guys away.
Yeah, so, I mean, again, Interpol is not here to tell a country what to do and how to legislate itself, but we do understand that the legality, the laws have to match the emerging crimes, and, in the U.S., they're having the same issue. So that's really not something that we would directly say, person to person. What I would say, though, from any perspective, what I will say, and I'm not saying that government should make it mandatory, but if you are a victim of cybercrime, whether it's anything from being a business being attacked by ransomware, or a child who's a victim of sexual exploitation, is to contact law enforcement. I know that sometimes it can be very, very difficult to make that, because you're now suffering through the worst day of your life, and now you have to go talk to law enforcement about it. But if you really want to make receive some justice and then help future victims, it is to reach out to law enforcement.
Now, I know you don't tell governments how to legislate and so on, but I do wonder how much it impedes what you can do when it actually comes to enforcing what you're doing.
So for us, our enforcement is only through our member countries' law enforcement agencies. So it's really upon them. We'll provide them as much information, as much support as we can, and then it's on their individual governments what they do with their legislation.
How, again, going to this idea that hackers can create widespread havoc, how much is this kind of DDoS, a term that's come into our vocabulary now, distributed denial of service, how much of a threat is that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you see, so DDoS attacks, that's the slang for it, but
DDoS,
yeah, that's okay. Yeah, so obviously it is a significant avenue of attack. But we, again, if a company or if a business or an entity is suffering from a DDoS attack or any sort of cyber attack, my point of view, and I think you would talk to anybody from law enforcement, is reach out to your local law enforcement, have them, and if they need support, then come to Interpol and Cybercrime Directorate, and we'll do more than anything that we can, we'll do anything that we can help.
Dr. Chiton, what is the biggest challenge that you're facing right now? What eats up your time and resources?
Well, I would always say that funding and finding personnel. Interpol, we bring in seconded officers. So basically, like myself, I come from the U.S. My home agency pays for me. I am on loan to Interpol for a few years. So it's getting those agencies from all different countries. And we want a wide spectrum. I would have like somebody from every region to come in and be a part of our team. So it's finding, the personnel, it's finding the funding for the different projects that we have. Those are the things that really take a lot of my time.
I guess the great thing about being such a diverse group of people at Interpol is that you do take back these skill sets with you and share them.
Yeah, that's the selling point. Like, we want your best and your brightest. You come to us because I know it's also a sort of a catch-22 when you send somebody who's so good, now they're not with you anymore in your home agency. So I understand that. But my hope is that when you come to us, when you leave in the 3 years, whether sometimes they're short-term secondments for a year, sometimes they're 3 years or extended, my hope is that when you go back, you use the skills that you develop, especially like the diplomacy skills, the ability to mediate, those sort of skills that you may not get as a police officer, as an agent, you take those skills back and enhance your agency.
You explained how this isn't really what you got into. You weren't really going into cybercrime,
right.
But of course everything's evolved and it's continually evolving. So is AI, artificial intelligence, your friend or enemy, for example?
No, I think any emerging technology, I'll just say, in my opinion, it's neutral. So it's whoever it's in the hands of, whatever the intent is, that's really whether it's good or bad. And so we understand the criminality, the uses of it, and criminals are always going to take advantage, whether it's AI, quantum computing. I mean, it was computers, 20 years ago, and smartphones and apps and all that. Whatever emerging crime, there's going to be some ingenious criminal who's going to try to find it and exploit it. So again, it's on us as law enforcement to be forward-looking, to say, hey, these are the emerging threats, and how can we combat that? And so within Interpol, we do have an innovation center that's also housed with Singapore that's looking at those very concerns.
This sounds like an echo of guns don't kill people,
yeah,
people kill
it's
people.
the same. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to compare
of course,
one to the other, but again, it really is how you use it, because I think there's going to be some great uses with AI, obviously, and then obviously it's going to be some negatives.
I think the way I've heard you put it is that basically technology is agnostic.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's how I feel.
In terms of keeping up with everything, do you have the resources to be able to keep up?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously, could we always use more funding? Could we always use more personnel? Of course. I mean, any agency could. But what we should do, and I think in Cybercrime Directorate, is we should be more forward leaning and continue sustained communications with our 196 member countries to actually ask them, what do you need? Because we may think from Singapore, these are the cyber concerns that we think you should be concerned about, and yet it may not be. So that's part of my strategy, is to conduct outreach with those members to say, what exactly do you need from Interpol?
How do you regard the term cyber psychology, and how does that fit in with what you do?
For me, from a law enforcement perspective, what I want to always look at is when we go and interview a victim, whether the victim is a business, a hospital, and have to talk to the CISO who's now suffering through stress, and I'm not comparing them, or to talk to somebody who's been a victim of some sort of sexual exploitation, especially with children, is to understand that is their worst day. And so for law enforcement, I think our goal is always to get the evidence, to get the interview, and then go on and catch the bad guy and stop the next thing from happening. But I think from law enforcement, we have to take a step back and realize that these are some bad days, the worst days that these people are suffering through, to show them some grace, show them some kindness at the same time.
Technology is moving fast, but let me wrap up by asking you if you could paint me a picture of what the cybercrime scene might look like maybe a decade from now.
So, I mean, I wish I had a magic ball and I knew who to invest in, which companies were going to be a part. But obviously AI, I mean, that's the buzzword, AI. I think quantum, computing and the encryption that's going to become problematic in the future. I think those are things that I'm sure criminals are already salivating at the thought of. I think that there are the law enforcement, other government agencies that are also looking at that and saying, no, we're going to be ready for this. We're going to, maybe not everything, but we're actually, the focus isn't just going to be on for the criminals. We're actually going to concentrate on these things too. So I will just say, though, that Interpol has been in existence. We just celebrated our 100th anniversary last year. So 1923 to 2023. And so in 10 years, I think the Interpol and Interpol's Cybercrime Directorate will still be combating, transnational cybercrime and still being a good partner to 196 member countries.
Dr. Neil Chiton, thank you very much. Good luck with your work.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on The Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.